I'm watching all of One Piece for the first time and reviewing every individual episode, along with every movie, special, and other piece of media I can get my hands on. These reviews are uploaded as individual episode of movie reviews here on my channel, but if you want to watch them all in one go, you can come to these full Saga coverages that I do at the end of every major collection of story arcs. And this video you're watching is one of those. Hello and welcome to the full Saga coverage of Water 7. Just as an overview for what will be covered in this video, at the end of each arc and movie that introduces a new devil fruit, I'll be adding it to this handy dandy tier list. I'm also going to occasionally pop in every once in a while to break up the shorts feed. If you're new to this channel and these videos, you may want to familiarize yourself with the previous 3 Saga coverages if you want to get all the running jokes I make. Otherwise, feel free to make yourself at home, grab a cup of sea train ballast, and enjoy as we start off with Long Ring, Long Land. I'm watching all of One Piece for the first time and reviewing every episode. Episode 207, Sea Monkeys. Who would have guessed that sea monkeys have a thirst for blood? This episode marks the start of the Long Ring, Long Land arc, and I can see why it's called that. I think animal but long is my new favorite category of creature design, especially the dachshund dog and the snow leopard. If I had to guess who was responsible for this ship at the beginning having no sails, it would be these Foxy pirates, since that makes sense in the narrative, but it's concerning that they have the Straw Hat ship literally surrounded by chains. I would like to issue a formal apology to Bellamy. It appears he has a rough home life I was not aware of. This is also the start of another new intro, and I love how they're all falling following the end of the Sky Island. But this one's also full of contextless, presumably spoilers, that I'm just gonna shove to the back of my mind for now. Overall, this is a promising start to what is hopefully going to be an amazing saga. Episode 208. Ah, so that's why they call it Long Ring, Long Land. Is it just me, or does that kind of look like a crown? I guess that means this old man is the real king of the pirates. Step aside, Gold Roger, it's old man on a horse's turn. And step aside, old man on a horse, it's the Foxy pirate's turn. I hate to say it, but new peak character design has arrived. I like that only Sanji and Robin know what a Davy Back game is. It makes sense because Sanji grew up with Zeph and Robin's a knowledge hoarder, and Arlong probably would have killed anyone that tried to challenge him to one. If you're allowed to wager up to 3 crewmates, it doesn't make any sense to wager only one, because they don't know the rules of the game. So while doing all 3 is also a bad option, they should have wagered 2. That way, even if they lose someone in the first round, they would still be able to win them back. That is assuming they're allowed to win them back. This could be a no takesies backsies situation. Episode 209. The concept of the Davy Back games feels like a fun little side jaunt, especially after the super serious Sky Island saga. But holy cow, is there so much padding this episode. A boat race where they're constantly trying to distract the Straw Hats and cheat. That would be a fun 1 episode jaunt, especially because we know there's still 2 more games to follow. But when it takes up the majority of the episode's runtime and then goes into the next episode too, that's just way too much. That being said, all the different methods of sabotage were really fun. I also like the design choice to have all the Foxy pirates wear those masks. The Straw Hats need a uniform too. I'm gonna be honest, I got distracted by a deer halfway through filming this one, and so I lost my train of thought completely. I'm watching all of One Piece for the first time and reviewing every episode. Episode 210. Ladies and gentlemen, we have another Wapple on our hands. Incredibly useful devil fruit power. Incredibly infuriating user. How dare he steal Chopper from the crew. Also, Robin just straight up calls him a furry for doing that. I seriously love Zoro's big bro, little bro relationship with Chopper, especially in this scene where he tells Chopper to just deal with being picked, but in like a prideful way. Finishing off the barrel race, Nami once again proved why she's the world's greatest navigator, and also that she wouldn't last a day on social media. Half fish man, half giant? How does that even work? Like, logistically. Heaven forbid his mother was the fishman's side. Episode 211. This is another episode like the barrel race. If they could have done the whole thing in a single episode, I would be more appreciative of it, but the fact that it cuts to black right when things are getting good, after a whole episode of Sanji and Zoro getting tossed around like flailing pancakes, that's when things get a little annoying. But also like the barrel episode, it's not all bad. I especially like this bit where Nami convinces Sanji to wear the ball, and then Zoro calls him the prince of the kingdom of lame asses. And the fact that they're only losing because these two refuse to work together is also something that stems from their long-standing rivalry. So it actually is a pretty big character moment when they're like, we gotta set aside our differences just for the sake of the crew, which makes it all more frustrating that this is extending to another episode. We're only like 5 episodes into this arc, but it's already been so much padding. It would be so much better if they just did normal paced episodes followed by a filler arc. Episode 212. I have a feeling I'm gonna be saying this a lot, given that it's happened 4 episodes in a row now, but I hate how much padding there is in this episode. This sequence where Zoro slams the big guy into the ball thing happened twice in a row. Not to mention this sequence where everyone's being like, oh, he's gonna pick me, also played twice, just reversed the second time. Granted, adding Foxy to the end of it was a funny bit. And this scene where everyone's yelling at Nami goes on for way too long. How on earth do you go from something as well-paced and plotted as G8 to this? That being said, it is sweet that Luffy got Stilts Guy as horseback. Thank goodness there's only one more game and the Straw Hats are for sure gonna win it. There's no way they'd get rid of Chopper at this point in the story. Chopper just existing probably probably sells enough merchandise to justify his inclusion tenfold. Episode 213. I completely mentally checked out of this episode the second I saw it was roller derby. That being said, I love how everyone's jersey number is significant. Luffy's number 1 because he's the captain, Robin's number 6 because she was the 6th person to join the crew, Usopp is number 800 because he controls an army of 800 men, and Nami is number 73. I didn't expect it, but the existence of an animal man makes sense, especially if there's already fishmen. But what is this guy? He's too oddly shaped to be a giant. He's definitely not one of the fishmen. He's just perplexing. I'm fairly indifferent to the whole Luffy doesn't know how to skate thing. On one hand, it's kind of funny, but on the other, it's just a meaningless plot contrivance. But it gave us this scene where Robin rolls him like a conveyor belt, so you win some, you lose some. I hope next episode follows the structure of all the other games so far, so it's finally over. Episode 214. So it turns out the cheetah guy just has a cheetah-themed devil fruit, which I guess makes more sense than animal men considering we've never seen them before. I think the biggest problem that this episode has is that it's just not very funny. There's not enough action to justify the lack of humor, and there's not enough humor to justify the lack of action. Instead, it sits perfectly in the middle of a roller derby-themed nightmare. There's a couple funny moments, like Luffy telling the octopus guy not to get back up, or continuing Nami's habit of stealing things to even out the fairness, but the joke of constantly yelling handsome or split head is just not very funny to me. I'm just glad that it's finally over and we can move on. Seriously, 2 episodes per game is just way too much. Episode 215. This has been a frustratingly bad arc. I'm just glad that it's all finally over. Huh? Okay. I swear to high heaven, if these Davy Back games are how they recruit their shipwright, I'm gonna be upset. The nicest thing I have to say about this episode is that I like that the intro still uses the same 3D asset from the 4th movie for the Mary. They're definitely getting their mileage out of it, and they're probably gonna use it for a long time. Otherwise, this is just about the worst episode of One Piece so far. Dare I say worse than Warship Island. This episode is just the epitome of did it funny, not laugh. And what the hell's with everyone questioning the referee for rules that make a ton of sense in this world? I think the most frustrating part about this arc though is how they're just playing hot potato with Chopper. Episode 216. Red light, green light. A whole episode dedicated to red light, green light. I think I'm going to explode with apathy. This arc has been so needlessly extended and drawn out that it hurts. And losing 2 Straw Hats means that either there's going to be some dumb plot contrivance or one of them is gone forever. And we both know that one of them isn't gone forever. Even though the episodes that were actually adapted from the manga weren't my favorite, these pure filler episodes have been almost offensively bad. Episode 217. From what I've been told, this is a change that was made specifically for the anime, but having the 500-man wager just destroys all narrative tension. If they were fighting for the fate of an individual crewmate, there would be a more realistic possibility of them failing. But when the fate of the whole crew and the next 6 generations of their children is on the line, there's no chance in hell this becomes the Foxy show. That being said, I like how Foxy lives up to his namesake by fighting like a real trickster, using his devil fruit powers to create environmental hazards and trick Luffy rather than brute force him. It makes for a really fun fight with the blend of humor and action that's been missing from the previous few episodes. I think it's safe to say that after the last few episodes, this one is a major improvement. Not to mention the almighty power of Luffy in an afro. Nothing beats the power of an afro. Episode 218. I know that Luffy's afro is just an excuse to get him to not wear his hat, but it allows for this gag where everyone but Nami gets why the afro is an advantage, which turns these crowd shots into something additive rather than something patative. Overall, A+ inclusion for Luffy's toughest fight yet. It's insane that between Arlong, Crocodile, and God, the person that's come closest to defeating Luffy is a Danny DeVito lookalike. I really enjoyed this underdeck portion of their fight. It plays out a lot like classic Looney Tunes stuff, and I grew up watching Boomerang, so I love classic Looney Tunes stuff. This is exactly something that Bugs Bunny would do. Which is funny because Luffy's normally the Bugs Bunny, but in this case he's the Elmer Fudd. Episode 219. Luffy winning because a shard of mirror got stuck in his afro is perfect. No notes, genuinely 10 out of 10. It is the perfect way to pay off the inclusion of the afro. And Luffy hitting Foxy so hard he distorts to such an extent even in slow motion. Talk about a cathartic victory. I also really like the Foxy spite toss gag, and Luffy's poor drawing skills coming back into play for the redone Foxy flag is hilarious. I'm hit or miss in sending these 3 off on their own. Foxy is the only one of them I really dislike as a character, the other 2 are just eh. So in a way that does make it feel kind of karmically imbalanced, but they were with Foxy when they kidnapped the horse, so I guess they deserved it. Speaking of, I'm glad the old man got a happy ending. I couldn't care less about him as a character, but it's a nice way to send off the arc. And if I never see Foxy again, it'll be too soon. There's one important thing I need to address that I have gotten many comments about. Long Ring Longland is in fact a canon arc. adapted from the manga. But everything starting with roller derby and ending with a red light green light is filler added to pad the arc. In the manga, it's a simple 3-game bout, ending with Luffy beating Foxy and reclaiming Chopper instead of stealing 500 souls from Foxy's crew. And the entire ending with the mole is just completely out of nowhere. Albeit the mole is also based on the mole from the Gadatsu cover story that we're gonna get to later in this video. I know this because I actually did something that's a first for me. I went and read the manga version of the story. I haven't read anything else from the manga other than the cover stories because I want this project to specifically be about the anime. But my goodness, Foxy forced my hand. The pacing is so much better in the manga without all the extra games, and I still hate Foxy, but slightly less so than before. The whole arc just suffers from subpar pacing and extended padding that absolutely obliterates the enjoyability it would otherwise have. If it weren't over 200 episodes in, or the sunk cost fallacy didn't exist, this is definitely the arc that would lose the most people on binge sprees. Foxy's Slow Fruit is in the S tier. With the Slow Beam, he was able to almost defeat Luffy and was only thwarted by the power of the Afro and his own incompetence. Ocean's Dream. I'm watching all of One Piece for the first time and reviewing every episode. Episode 220. Robin staying up all night to consume her favorite media? She's just like me. For real, for real. I'm pretty conflicted on the rest of the content of this episode though. On the positive side, Amnesia storylines can be a fun way to engage with characterization and how far a character has grown since their initial appearance. And this episode has a lot of great humorous moments, but the biggest downside of doing the Amnesia storyline is that it creates a sense of drama that isn't very compelling when you're not willing to engage it beyond the most surface level. And I'll give you 3 guesses as to how in depth at least this first episode has gone in. Any excuse to get that Shanks flashback in, huh? That being said, these character focused lower stakes arcs are probably the best way to do filler, so I am looking forward to seeing how the rest of it plays out. Episode 221. Robin's operating on at least 24 hours without sleep. She's just built different. For just a moment, I fully believed that Luffy was gonna straight up gum pistol that child. You know, I appreciate that this filler arc is doing something different. Instead of obligatory child sidekick, it's obligatory child antagonist. I swear though, the whole memory loss thing is just an excuse to show me all the moments that nearly made me cry before. I'm not the biggest fan of having a scene where Nami's just buck naked, especially with the ridiculous length the scene goes to show everything but her nipples. I think I would have less of an issue with it if it wasn't also the scene where they replay the flashback. Especially when you compare it to Zoro's replayed flashback, where he's sitting serenely on a cliff fully clothed. I stand for equal rights. Either give Nami her clothes back or take Zoro's away from him. Episode 222. I really like the call out of how Luffy acts the same with his memories as he does without. It really shows how even though he's undergone some character changes, the minutiae of his personality hasn't been subject to alteration. It's something that works really well for a character like Luffy that's a catalyst for the change in others rather than being the character that changes himself. Something you'll see a lot in the archetypical shonen protagonist, of which Luffy helps set the standard. It's also something that's put well on display in this episode, and not just with Nami, but also in these little moments like when he calls Chopper to go along with them, or when he tricks Usopp into not guarding the ship. Personally, I think the choice to structure the Amnesia arc around Luffy's effect on his crewmates helps make it feel more novel rather than the stock plot that it easily could have become. Episode 223. This is the second time Zoro and Luffy have fought, the first time being in Whiskey Peak, but I think what differentiates this fight from that one, other than the mind control aspect, is that the fight choreography this time is just bad. Nothing visually interesting happens other than Luffy not getting his head cut off, and it gets resolved off screen. I kinda like that Nami wasn't convinced by Robin's little blurb about, "We're following our dreams, isn't there anything more noble?" Because Nami's regressed to a point where her biggest dream is freeing Kokoyashi Village. Oh, and it turns out the obligatory child antagonist actually was the obligatory child sidekick. Just the antagonist sidekick. You can't fool me, Toei. I know that that's just the Nola design colored orange. It's pretty fun to play the spot the cost saving measures game, like how it lingers on this shot for 30 seconds. That sounds facetious, but I really do like seeing cheaper animation on these less exciting bits because it means that more time and manpower is being saved and allocated to the more exciting parts. Episode 224. I'm not a big fan of the Zoro still being hypnotized bait and switch, but the sheer wrath he brings to dealing with the seahorse is really funny. When you put all the Straw Hat's dramatic backstory figures in one room together, it really puts into perspective how lucky Luffy is. Everyone else has lost loved ones or loved ones that suffered for them, and then Luffy's like, "Oh hey, I haven't seen you guys in a bit." It's also funny how they highlight the fact that they haven't shown Robin's backstory yet by just not including anyone for her. I'm not really a big fan of the magic seahorse's big plan, nor the fact that to regain their memories everyone has to start huffing seahorse farts. I think the worst part of it is that the seahorse wants to become a millennial dragon, which is a Warship Island reference. Nami's insurance rates must be out of this world because I don't think she's ever ridden that waiver without crashing into someone. And she never even stops to exchange information. Talk about an irresponsible driver. This probably looks ridiculous. we're gonna take a very small pit stop here to talk about the Ocean's Dream arc separate from the rest of the stretch of filler. Most One Piece filler is completely original to the anime, but Ocean's Dream is an exception of sorts. Kind of. Ocean's Dream started as a video game for the PlayStation 1, but there are some significant differences for the adaptation. In the game, instead of Robin being a night owl, she also loses her memories, and it's Bon Clay who steps in to help the Straw Hats regain what was lost. The game also got a handheld remake around the time that the Ocean's Dream arc was airing, albeit retitled to Dragon's Dream. Other than that little tidbit, Ocean's Dream is a fairly standard filler arc. It is perfectly watchable even if it does call back to Warship Island of all filler arcs. It doesn't reach the same heights as G8, but then again, neither does Long Ring Long Land. Foxy's return.
I'm watching all of One Piece for the first time and reviewing every episode.
Episode 225.
Everything about this episode, except for the Foxy crew on the Going Merry, is actually pretty solid. This guy riding his bike across the seas explicitly searching for Luffy, so he's either Admiral Akainu or in love with him. I'm gonna lean towards the Admiral bit since he has the attention of the world government. I think my favorite part of this episode though are Robin and Chopper's little interactions, like developing a secret code and playing board games together. I also just straight up died laughing the second time Zoro tried to catch the sword and Sanji interrupted. But I think the most surprising thing about this episode is how it did the impossible and made me feel bad for Foxy. Of course, I feel slightly less bad knowing he was carrying an afro in his pants the whole time. He could have whipped that out any moment and instead he relegated it to Luffy. Talk about a grade A jerk. At least I can rest in the solace of knowing I'm gonna see Foxy get punched in the face at least one more time.
Episode 226.
Portia's looking a little different this episode. Something about it, I just can't figure out what. There's no heterosexual explanation for this. At least I know that Zoro Sanji shippers had a field day with this episode. I don't think I've mentioned it before, but I really like that Nami's abilities are weather-based. It's incredibly fitting for her character, her role as a navigator, and her supernatural abilities when it comes to predicting weather. I love how Chopper just acts like everyone on the crew's little brother. He's so great. I love that little guy. Oh, and it turned out that Bicycle Guy is a Marine Admiral, just not the one that Jonathan mentioned in G8. He and Robin also appear to have history, so could we finally get Robin's tragic backstory? There have been hints at it and the most basic summary possible of it, but I feel like there's a reason they're hiding Robin's backstory.
Episode 227.
The first thing Aokiji does when he sees Nami is comment on the size of her boobs and then ask her out. He's so real for that. But I feel like his whole concept of slovenly justice, only going after people when they're too big of a threat, is kind of an inherently flawed system of philosophy, especially when he's able to so effortlessly defeat two of the strongest Straw Hats and Sanji. Even when he's talking about how he knows the Straw Hats are going to become a huge threat in the future, he doesn't get off his ass until Robin attacks him first. Speaking of, Aokiji mentions that he knows Luffy's grandpa, and with the only other family member of Luffy's that we know being Ace, you know that grandpa's probably got to be a powerhouse. Normally I don't like side plots like the castaways that take over an episode, but I think in this case it's pretty effective, and does well at establishing that Aokiji isn't necessarily a villain, just an antagonist to the Straw Hats. Obviously the Marines aren't immune to corruption, but I do like that a majority of them so far have just been people doing their jobs.
Episode 228.
SMH my head, Frodo and Fake G over here unable to save Robin. Meanwhile, Goat Sop comes in clutch, and Chopper getting lit by saving all their asses. I think it's clear I'm out of touch with modern slang, but this episode does do a really good job of establishing admirals as a real threat, especially since every Vice Admiral so far has been nothing but a clown stuffed into the circus tent that is the Marines. I also like that Luffy has a good sense of humor about losing so spectacularly. But I think my favorite little joke this episode is Robin being gyroscopically stable. You know expectations in the series are weird when Frog doing the front stroke is completely believable, but train station in the middle of the ocean just comes out of the blue. But I think the craziest thing about this episode is that it's technically still part of the Foxy arc.
Please, somebody, anybody, find me a devil fruit so I can eat it and then jump directly into the ocean if I ever see Foxy and his crew again. Except for Portia, she's cool. Almost all of Foxy's return is filler, and while I laughed at some of the moments, I very much still dislike Foxy as a character. The only saving grace that this arc has is that it's Aokiji's introduction into the anime. I do also want to correct a misconception I had in one of the shorts. I didn't quite understand the concept of slovenly justice, thinking it was just about waiting for a threat to become a big deal to take care of it. Thank you to everyone who pointed out I was wrong, especially the one specific commenter. I'm pretty sure I hearted your comment. I don't know, I forgot to save it, and that's a lot of episodes to go back through. As was pointed out, slovenly justice is actually about understanding a threat before immediately taking action and jumping the gun on people who could potentially mean no harm. That's actually a very interesting concept and handling of the Marines' ideal of justice, and I look forward to seeing how it plays out later in the series. Especially because the saga does a lot of dealing with the concept of justice in the first place.
Aokiji's Ice Ice Fruit is an S tier, with all the other Logias right above Gaspard and Crocodile. The Ice Fruit and Sand Fruit have similar capabilities. The Ice Fruit just freezes instead of dries, which in my opinion has more use for cases like food preservation and, as Habkiji demonstrates, travel.
We're going to be taking our first real break from the shorts feed for a little bit to talk about our first movie of the saga, which you may have already seen me talking about depending on how I end up releasing all of these. Sorry if you have, sorry if you haven't.
Baron Omatsuri and the Secret Island.
Just like the previous two One Piece movies, Baron Omatsuri released outside of a special event, although it did keep up the tradition of a yearly March release in Japan. And only in Japan. It never received a worldwide release. Despite that, it's still a fan favorite around the world. But why is that the case? Well, to figure that out, we'll have to take a look at the movie itself. Before even delving into the plot, you'll be immediately struck by the major departure in style that Baron Omatsuri takes from the TV anime. While minor deviations from the anime have always been present in One Piece movies, none have really been to the same extent as we see here and now. The art style is a result of the director, Mamoru Hosoda. You may know him from films that he would go on to direct after Baron Omatsuri, like Wolf Children, Summer Wars, or my personal favorite of his, Bell. And if none of those ring a bell, he also directed 3 Digimon movies before leaving his mark on One Piece. Personally, I really like the art style. The simple lighting on the characters perfectly contrasts the complex painted backgrounds in a way that complements the narrative and atmosphere of the movie for reasons I'll dive into soon. This massive shift in style is also indicative of the massive shift in tone that Baron Omatsuri and the Secret Island takes in relation to its predecessor films, the anime, and the manga. Action and adventure elements are still present in the movie, but the actual genre leans much more into the thriller category, with an underlying element of darkness and mystery as the Straw Hats slowly unravel the Secret Island's island-based secrets.
There's an immediate ominous atmosphere at the film's opening, just a dark screen with little noise and an open invitation for any pirate crew that considers themselves among the best to visit Omatsuri Island. A veritable paradise with everything that a resort could ever need. So of course, the Straw Hats set course, sailing through vibrant blue seas and ending up on a drab gray shore bordering a jungle. But inside that jungle lies the promised resort, and its proprietor, Baron Omatsuri. Off the bat, things are twisted from what was promised. The Straw Hats can have unlimited access to the resort if they can overcome a series of trials called the Ordeal of Hell. The first of which is goldfish catching, with a paper net versus Omatsuri's crewmate Mujigoro. Mujigoro, and really everyone on the island other than Omatsuri himself, has a large mysterious sprout atop his head. Mujigoro also happens to be the world's foremost goldfish catching expert when it comes to giant goldfish that are his pet. Well, foremost other than Robin. The Straw Hats' victory is short-lived, as their attempt to leave the island only has them met with another ordeal of hell, the ring toss. The game is gondola-based, and only 4 Straw Hats can participate, so the 3 Devil Fruit users sit out. Chopper goes off to explore the island a little, Robin gets Mujigoro drunk to extract answers from him, and Luffy gets pelted with rocks. Chopper ends up meeting the Tea Room Pirates, a father and his 3 children who came to the island in search of a picnic spot and got caught in the ordeal of hell. Having failed to catch the goldfish, the 4 of them have been on the run from Baron Omatsuri and mistook Chopper for one of his men, but everyone quickly becomes friends when they realize he isn't. During the actual ordeal of hell, Usopp and Nami are paired up, but their boat very quickly catches fire, and an emergency kit sweeps Usopp into the air on a glider, leaving Nami alone and Usopp to catch a glimpse of a mysterious structure atop the island's mountain. Zoro and Sanji are predictably bickering the entire time, taking out all but one opponent who uses their infighting to his advantage until Usopp descends to save the day. Meanwhile, Robin has gotten Mujigoro to drink so much that he's on the verge of vomiting and asks him about any strange flowers present on the island, with Baron Omatsuri's shoulder flower having caught her attention. There's one flower unique to the island. At its highest peak grows the Lily Carnation. Meanwhile, Luffy is having one hell of a time chasing the guy who threw rocks at him, only to learn that he belongs to the Toothbrush Mustache Pirates and wants Luffy to join him and his resistance against Baron Omatsuri. This is where the thriller elements of the movie really kick off, as the Tea Room Pirates show Chopper an old wanted poster of the Red Arrow Pirates from years ago. Just as Chopper remarks that Baron Omatsuri is the only one who looks any different, the Baron shoots him. This is the moment in the story where the mystery really begins, so I want to discuss a few things before heading into it. To start, let's take another look at the art. Everything put to frame has a deliberate feel to it, except for the globe of the real-world Earth. Take a look at these stellar and beautifully done backgrounds. Each gives the impression that it's just real enough from a distance, but when examined closely, the brushstrokes are keenly evident. There's also a striking lack of a stationary feel. Everything shifts and changes on a whim in the lead up to the first ordeal of hell, and no structure is permanently in one place, giving everything an uneasy feel. The amazing contrast between the simple shading and flat colors on the characters and these highly detailed backgrounds also aids in the facade of the island. The two simply do not fit together, almost like everything was designed not just to trick the audience into thinking it was real, but also the characters. In that regard, the real-world globe might have been intentional, a subtle detail that in other contexts would be innocuous, and here serves as a hint that something lies beneath the surface.
or it really was a mistake and I'm reading too far into it. The whole first act really just works to set the stage for what's to come. The underlying sense of unease has yet to fully seep in. Instead, there's just small hints towards a larger conspiracy, like the plant stems on everyone's heads and the constant misdirection that the Straw Hats are facing. The Tea Room Pirates picnic is even briefly shown in the jungle before the second ordeal of hell. But most importantly, the first act sets up the character dynamics for the rest of the movie. The father of the Tea Room Pirates is, simply put, just not that strong, and he asks Chopper to play along so his kids will stay happy. The Toothbrush Mustache Pirate is looking for new allies to go against Baron Omatsuri. Robin is aware that something is going on and trying to solve it. Zoro and Sanji are bickering more than usual after both losing in the ring toss. Nami is upset because she got tied up and hung by a rope while Usopp went off gliding. And Chopper is dead. Well, not quite yet, but we'll circle around to that again. Back in the narrative, the Straw Hats' victories are being rewarded with dinner, but everyone notices that Chopper is missing. Sanji gets upset at Omatsuri's chef receiving praise for subpar food and immediately engages him in an optional battle that he handily wins. Meanwhile, Nami is still mad at Usopp, so she goes to extract more information from Muchigoro with more alcohol. Meanwhile, Robin decides to go looking for the Lily Carnation. Meanwhile, Usopp gets annoyed that he's being ignored and wanders off too. Robin comes across a graveyard of shipwrecks, correctly deducing that the Red Arrow Pirates crashed on the island. Usopp finds a Kappa kid that murders him for his hat. Nami learns that, in Muchigoro's mind, the Red Arrow Pirates met Gold Roger just last week, and then Muchigoro disintegrates. Thus, the stage is set for the final ordeal of hell, one in which everyone splits up because they just can't stand each other right now. Sharpshooting. Luffy is the only one to stay behind, and has to contend with Omatsuri himself, the others running off and being beaten by the Kappa kid. Zoro actually does get some slashes in, but they're completely ineffective for mysterious reasons. Luffy ends up running away from Omatsuri's attack, a homing arrow, only being saved by the Toothbrush Mustache Pirate, whose name is Brief. You see, Brief's crewmates were fed to a monster by Baron Omatsuri, leaving only their captain alive and fighting. Back with Chopper, he and the Tea Room Pirates are at the peak of the mountain and the base of the Lily Carnation. Monstrous tendrils reach down to grab the youngest of the family, but Chopper saves her. The children try to save him in kind, but the father pulls them away, desperate to ensure his family's safety at the cost of Chopper's life. Soon we see that Chopper is actually the last of the Straw Hats, and the rest are in the process of being eaten by the flower. Muchigoro regenerates as the Lily Carnation digests our heroes. As Muchigoro wanders off, Luffy approaches Baron Omatsuri, looking for his friends, only to be met with the shocking truth. His friends have all been consumed, and what little is left of them is whittling away moment by moment. Every attack that Luffy tries to launch is met with an arrow from Omatsuri, eventually pinning him to a rock. In one final desperate attempt, he thrusts his head out, but it doesn't reach. Omatsuri gives Luffy one final offer: to live in the same misery that the Baron has endured for years, or join his crewmates in death. As Omatsuri readies his final arrow, Luffy is saved once more by Brief with important news. The youngest Tea Room Pirate can hear the Straw Hats' voices coming from the flower. They're still alive, and Luffy can save them. Luffy wastes no time. With Brief acting as a distraction, the charge to the Lily Carnation begins, until Brief gets hit by an arrow. This moment is one of the most important and pivotal in the entire film. Dare I say, a moment the entire thematic foundation sits upon. Here, Luffy is presented with a dilemma that mirrors Omatsuri's own fate. It's established by this point that Baron Omatsuri's crew all died in a storm over 20 years ago, and Omatsuri has been using the Lily Carnation's power to essentially puppet around memories of his former crewmates by feeding the flower pirate crews. He forces each crew's captain to suffer the way he did by intentionally making the ordeals of hell frustrating to do as a team, driving everyone apart to pick them off easier. Luffy ends up with two options: sacrifice Brief's life as a distraction to save his friends, a choice that mirrors Omatsuri's own path of pain, or save Brief and continue fighting like hell. If you've seen One Piece, you know what option he picks. Every time Brief has interacted with Luffy, he's done a little mustache salute that Luffy hasn't returned, and he's come to consider Luffy a true ally / friend / nakama if you're a weeb, even if Luffy hasn't fully displayed that in kind yet. But this moment, where Luffy refuses to stoop to Omatsuri's level, is marked by him returning the mustache salute, a ray of kindness in an atmosphere of darkness. And it's that kindness that gives Luffy the strength to push back Omatsuri and destroy the Lily Carnation. Only, it isn't the Lily Carnation, just a manifestation of it that dissolves into thousands of arrows, one for each day of Omatsuri's suffering. The real Lily Carnation has taken the Straw Hats to the place it's been the whole time: Omatsuri's shoulder. Luffy is beset by arrows, but there's still a chance to stop Omatsuri. The father of the Tea Room Pirates, encouraged by Daisy's kindness, grabs Omatsuri's bow and an arrow from the ground, letting it fly after a moment of hesitation, killing the Lily Carnation and instantly reverting the entirety of Omatsuri's crew to plants. Omatsuri is left alone once more, but the ghosts of his crew encourage him to let go of the past and find new friends, and Luffy straight up hits him as hard as he can. The day is saved, and everyone can finally live happily ever after. I cannot stress this enough. Go watch Baron Omatsuri and the Secret Island. The summary I just gave does not do it justice. It's something that you really just have to watch and dig into for yourself. But I watched it twice, so I've got some more digging to do. I mentioned before in the pivotal moment that the thematic throughline of the movie is solidified by those linchpin events. From a writing and thematic perspective, Baron Omatsuri is the single best villain in any One Piece movie that I've seen so far. I always have to preface so far in case something unexpectedly cool happens in a later movie, but I have a feeling that Omatsuri is always going to remain in at least the top 5. I read the central theme of the movie as being about grief and the lengths that people go to avoid moving on. Omatsuri refuses to move on from the death of his crew and forces others into the same position as himself. It's also directly stated that most captains choose to let Omatsuri finish them off over living a life without their crews, the notable exception being Brief, which I'll expand more on soon. The Ordeals of Hell being twisted versions of carnival games also plays into this, because I can never move on past the fact that I've just wasted $20 trying to win a giant Rastafarian banana that cost the fair 10 cents to purchase. Speaking of the Ordeals of Hell, I absolutely love that they're designed to be intentionally divisive for crewmates to go through together. It's not enough for Omatsuri to reanimate his crewmates using the lives of others, he wants them all to suffer. His menacing motive and showman personality combine to create an absolutely spectacular villain, especially at the end when the true form of the Lily Carnation is revealed and Omatsuri has turned into a husk of himself, fueled only by the desire to pass on the suffering he feels to others. Also, having him use a bow and arrow as a weapon is pretty cool. Luffy may be bulletproof, but the devastating way the arrows pierce his limbs fits the mood incredibly. I do also want to point out that when I've talked about previous One Piece movies, specifically Chopper's Kingdom and Cursed Holy Sword, I was turned away by the sudden introduction of a brand new power system that exists exclusively on one island and is utilized by the villains of the movie. But now that I've seen that exact same string of words played out in front of my eyes in an enjoyable way, I think that the real reason I was previously disappointed was the lack of proper build-up. Where Chopper's Kingdom and Cursed Holy Sword both introduced their respective powerful treasures as legendary myths that everyone knew about and utilized them with reckless abandon, it sucked. No ifs, ands, or buts, those two movies poorly utilized their gimmicks. But Baron Omatsuri does the exact opposite. Very few people know about the Lily Carnation, and it's treated as a very well-kept secret that even Robin, who has 20 years of espionage experience, can only extract small pieces of information about. Heck, Baron Omatsuri kills anyone who gets too close to the truth, and the only one who's seen the flower's power and can live to tell the tale is still on the island fighting against Omatsuri. Brief really is an interesting character when you think about it. In a way, he's a lot like Luffy, the bold and assertive captain of a band of pirates who does his best to protect others. But something that Brief has that even Luffy was lacking is the will to carry on after devastation. Brief lost his crew like every other captain to ever set foot on Omatsuri Island, but he does what the rest of them couldn't. He fights to carry on the memory of his crew, keeping his mustache salute and even a picture of them in his secret base. Luffy didn't even have the will to carry on fighting when he thought his crew was dead. And that, dear viewers, is what makes Baron Omatsuri and the Secret Island a good movie. Characters that serve a purpose both narratively and thematically. Brief is the shining example of the message the movie ends up sending. It's better to carry on the memory of the past forward than to let it hold you back. A sentiment even echoed by the ghosts of Omatsuri's crew in his final moments. Some random final thoughts to end the video. The Tea Room Pirates are also very important to the theme of the movie. It's implied that the mother of the family died at some point before the movie started, and the father has a ring attached to a necklace, literally carrying her memory and using that to help set an example for his children. Daisy, the youngest Tea Room Pirate, says that she can hear the voices of the Straw Hats inside the flower because she has good hearing. But it's heavily implied to be some form of the Mantra ability that was introduced in Skypiea, since some people are born being able to use it automatically. During a couple of shots, Luffy's face is drawn like the Who's from the C.G. Horton Here's a Who movie that came out 3 years after this movie did. I feel so bad for poor Muchigoro, since everyone's go-to way of extracting information is to pour champagne directly down his gullet. Omatsuri is a Japanese word for festival, so in an English context, the Straw Hats went to Festival Island, run by Lord Festival, and there were no cotton candy stands in sight. And I think that's all I have to say about Baron Omatsuri and the Secret Island. If you haven't yet, seriously, just go watch it on your own. If you're an English speaker, it might be a little tough to find since it never got an official release, but it's worth the trouble. We're gonna head back to the shorts feed for a bit, but don't worry because things are getting juicy since it's finally time for
Water 7.
I'm watching all of One Piece for the first time and reviewing every episode.
Episode 229.
This is gonna sound odd considering it's about a drunk old lady, but it's nice to see a female character that doesn't suffer from big tits tiny waistitis. I also like that it only takes a Straw Hats giving her food for her to be like, yo, hit up my man Iceberg, he'll do you good. So if everyone gets what they want out of the new shipwright, it'll be a 16-foot tall woman woman who's good at her job and might be an octopus. As for Water 7 itself, I really like that it's designed to look like Venice. It's always a delight when they get to a new island and we get to see what kind of culture it's based off of. I also really like Nami's new outfit for this arc. And speaking of new things that I like, these bowls are fun to look at. I said this a few episodes, but I want to reiterate because of how cute it is. I just love Chopper and Robin's dynamic. Chopper is everyone's favorite little brother, and Robin is everyone's cool aunt. So the two do really well when paired together. If the Mary snapped that easily, it's a good thing they're gonna get it fixed. The amount of battle damage she's taken has always been a highlight, but that's just a whole new level.
Episode 230.
I'm surprised that with all the random civilians that pop in to say hi to the Straw Hats, there's no dentists. After all, this is episode 230. I'm gonna be honest, soggy meat sounds like just about the worst food possible. I know most of them are in passing, but I like a lot of these mask designs. The Straw Hats coming into town during some sort of holiday is a pretty fun idea, and one that's obviously being used to someone's advantage. I swear, if they hurt Robin, I mean, I'll just be mildly upset if they hurt Robin. This is a cartoon from 20 years ago. I don't think I can do much. Let's play the Guess Which Shipwright is gonna become a Straw Hat game. My money's on this one because he's the first one that we see. I really like that the aesthetic of Water 7 goes all in on water. The fountain centerpiece and the elevators and the canals all make for a really fun location, but also a really dangerous one because apparently there are roving packs of wild Dr. Eggman. Where's Sonic the Hedgehog when you need him?
Episode 231.
During this appraisal scene, at first I thought, damn, Nami's good at appraising money. Then I remembered why, and now I'm sad. I love that the Frankie family has one unifying design trait between them all, and it's that they're all weirdos. I can't believe Oda was like, hey, you like Usopp? Well, here's cooler Usopp. Speaking of the Shipwright Company, this guy that says he wants Khalifa to kick him, mood. I can't believe Sanji genuinely has the ability to sense women he finds attractive. This iceberg guy seems pretty chill for being the mayor of the town and head of the company, but I like that he has a soft spot for small creatures. The way everything is being set up with the Frankie family stealing the money, I'm hopeful that this is going to be a smaller arc where the stakes are just whether or not the Mary gets fixed, and not like the fate of an entire island, kind of like how Skypiea was. I know that's what Long Ring Longland was supposed to be, but this is still the start of the saga, so I'm hopeful.
Episode 232.
I no longer think that Polly will become the Straw Hat's shipwright. He's pretty cool and he has good chemistry with them, but he's too much of a foil for Sanji, the way he's also a smoker and is obsessed with women's look just in the opposite way, not to mention they're both blonde. So even though he seems like he'd be a formidable crewmate, I have a feeling he won't be the one who ends up as a Straw Hat's shipwright, especially because he agrees with Kaku's assessment that the Mary is unfixable. It's definitely got its scars, but there's no way it's unfixable. If Doc 1 really is the best of the best, surely they can find a way. Besides, this is only a fifth of the way through the current amount of episodes. There's no way they ditch the Mary that easily.
Episode 233.
I appreciate this little guide on how ships are built, but even if the keel is damaged, there's gotta be like a devil fruit out there or something that can fix it, right? I love how Iceberg is perfectly fine dealing with pirates all day long, but the second the government stops by, that's where he draws the line. I am still curious who the new shipwright's going to be, because Kaku and Polly step too much onto the territory of Usopp and Sanji respectively. That really only leaves Bird Guy, I'm pretty sure his name is Lucci. And like, it would make sense, his gimmick doesn't really step on the toes of any other Straw Hats, but if we go by that logic, Spiky Hair Guy here is just as likely. The Frankie family may have gotten their money, but in doing so, they've managed to create the world's most formidable foe. Goth Usopp, the only foe stronger than Afro Luffy.
Episode 241.
I feel bad for Usopp running himself ragged to fix the Mary. If the keel is her spine, then he's just bandaging her ribs and hoping it helps. I also like that they're setting up to have the Frankie family try kidnapping him. Usopp definitely doesn't stand a chance against these guys in a fair fight, but if he home alones them, that would be a great way to give him a W. The shipwrights all standing guard outside Iceberg's room is a nice touch, but realistically, what are they gonna do when stacked up to Luffy's accomplishments? Granted, most of Luffy's biggest exploits aren't publicly known. I also like the lack of urgency in all the citizens evacuating Aqua Laguna. It really gives a sense that this is something that they're used to doing, which would give ample opportunity for someone to take advantage of. It all comes together to give the feeling that the Straw Hats happen to arrive at just the wrong time for just the wrong reason. I like the sense that they're finally hitting a string of bad luck after their normal bouts of good luck. Episode 235. This episode just hits really hard because not only is Usopp one of my favorite Straw Hats, all of the words he says about feeling out of place hit incredibly hard for someone who has depression. The tension between Luffy and Usopp, who up to this point have basically just acted like brothers, is really good character writing. It's easy to see where both of them are coming from and how the high emotional tension is just rising things to a point that they shouldn't have gotten to in the first place. And I also like that Usopp leaving is written to be winding tensions for the rest of the crew too. Especially poor Chopper. Top 10 Chopper face. I think the writing of this episode is also really benefited by the fact that the previous arc was Long Ring Longland, where they fought so hard to keep the crew from falling apart, and now it's splintering. But also, to be fair, Luffy could have handled easing Usopp Usopp into the idea of a new ship a little more tactfully.
Episode 236.
Luffy versus Usopp is an incredibly well done fight. I really like how it highlights how Usopp isn't as useless as he thinks he is, and really shows that despite his insecurities, he's very capable. Granted, Luffy's holding back here because they're friends, but even being able to push Luffy to the point where he stops holding back takes a lot of strength and effort from Usopp. I also really like how Usopp incorporates dials into his arsenal. It's something that he did in G8, but I'm glad to see it carried over to the story proper. Both fighters are going into it thinking they know exactly what the other is capable of. And since the stakes of the fight were more emotional than physical, in a way, everyone loses. But I think that's what makes this such a good fight episode.
It's like watching your friends get divorced, except they're both teenage anime pirates.
Episode 237. If I had to guess who shot Iceberg, the two most likely candidates would be the government and Robin. The government because spiky hair guy calls him out specifically, and Robin because Iceberg has her wanted poster in his office, and that suggests there's a history between the two. I like Frankie's flair for the dramatic, but with the silhouette, I thought that he was gonna have a goatee. No, that's just his chin. It's also very nice of him to give the crowd a chance to leave by announcing his entrance like the world's most flamboyant WWE superstar.
I'm glad that we get to see the Frankie family goons' perspective on the human and reindeer, equivalent of four monsters breaking into their house and blowing it up.
This bit where Sanji keeps asking Chopper what Robin likes in an effort to find her, and Chopper can only keep saying ancient ruins is so funny. Especially because the answer isn't just ancient ruins. It's also books.
Episode 238.
I guess it's time to add cyborgs to the ever-growing list of things that exist in One Piece right underneath sea trains. Frankie definitely seems like a fun antagonist to have around though, especially now that the Straw Hats are also wanted by Galley Law. If Frankie and the Doc 1 form and all teamed up for revenge, that could be a very bad situation for the Straw Hats. I just hope that Cyborg doesn't end up turning into convenient ass pole for whatever's needed in the moment. Iceberg says he could never forget her eyes. Me too, Iceberg. I get reminded of the deep sea Germa photo every time. I just want to know why Robin would shoot Iceberg. The only reason I could see Robin shooting Iceberg is if they had some sort of mysterious past where he did something wrong, but he acts equally dumbfounded as to why he would shoot him. And if he mistreated her in the past, that's something that he would be aware of. So what the hell is going on?
Episode 239.
For one brief terrible moment, I really thought that Frankie's cannon was his robo-schlong. But yeah, the possibility of Frankie and the shipwrights teaming up against the Straw Hats is, zero. Robin relapsing on evil, the Mary being replaced, Usopp leaving the crew. I just can't for the life of me get a read on where this arc is going. But in like a good way, I like being surprised. I'm not the biggest fan of the fights from the past few episodes. They're not bad choreography or layout wise, it's just that you can tell they spent a little too much budget on Luffy versus Usopp. I do appreciate that Frankie took the time to set up a little tea party while Luffy was fighting the shipwrights. I also like that Sanji and Chopper went out of their way to discreetly warn Usopp about the storm that is approaching. They may not be crewmates anymore, but they still care about him and the ship. I also like that Luffy's master plan to speak to Iceberg is to break into his house in broad daylight. Never change, Luffy. Never change.
Episode 240.
I love how Kokoro is just the weird drunk that spouts conspiracy theories that everyone happens to know. She mentions a government organization called CP9, who are presumably these shadowy figures talking with Robin. I'm not gonna lie, for just a second I thought the shadowy figure was Kaku because their voices sound just similar enough, but I think it's safe to say it's not Kaku, and I feel kinda dumb now. Why would Robin work with the government if she's had a bounty on her head since she was a child? It's either gotta be some sort of blackmail or she was a double agent the whole time. I do like that One Piece is willing to grow and change with its audience. Someone who was 13 in 1997 when the manga came out would be 21 by the time this episode came out. So it's only natural that the series would start delving into darker subject matter. And I think that willingness to change is why One Piece has held on to its longevity for so long.
Episode 241.
I feel bad for Usopp running himself ragged to fix the Mary. If the keel is her spine, then he's just bandaging her ribs and hoping it helps. I also like that they're setting up to have the Frankie family try kidnapping him. Usopp definitely doesn't stand a chance against these guys in a fair fight, but if he home alones them, that would be a great way to give him a W. The shipwrights all standing guard outside Iceberg's room is a nice touch, but realistically, what are they gonna do when stacked up to Luffy's accomplishments? Granted, most of Luffy's biggest exploits aren't publicly known. I also like the lack of urgency in all the citizens evacuating Aqua Laguna. It really gives a sense that this is something that they're used to doing, which would give ample opportunity for someone to take advantage of. It all comes together to give the feeling that the Straw Hats happen to arrive at just the wrong time for just the wrong reason. I like the sense that they're finally hitting a string of bad luck after their normal bouts of good luck.
Episode 242.
Why do all the other CP9 guys get full head coverings and Robin just gets that dinky mask? I get that they're trying to frame the Straw Hats, but it's just not fair. There are a lot of weird devil fruits, but for some reason, Door fruit just seems odd. Sprouting cans where they don't belong, perfect sense. Talking reindeer, no problem. But something about doors just seems silly. I do like the twist that these CP9 guys were never out to kill Iceberg in the first place. They just want whatever this mysterious document is. This is another action-heavy episode, and even though there are some moments you can tell they took a few shortcuts, everything is overall well choreographed. I also like the varied abilities that the Cypher Pole agents have, like this one jumping through the air. I'm gonna start a Luffy getting stuck in random spots and putting his teammates in jeopardy counter because this is at least the third time it happened.
The fourth if you count the snake.
Episode 243.
Well, yeehaw, I didn't expect Robin to be the fastest gun in the West. I really like Gunslinger Robin with 4 guns. This back and forth with the fisheye lens has real, you got games on your phone energy. I'm counting this for the Luffy getting stuck counter. I can't believe that Iceberg was betrayed by his most trusted employees and also his bartender. Seriously though, I get going undercover as shipwrights if you want to gain his trust, but the bartender? Right above the knees has got to be the worst spot to get shot. Well, other than the heart, neck, lung, brains, or any other vital spot. But the knees thing, that really sucks. I get why Cypherpole 9 would restrain Luffy since they want the Straw Hats to take the blame for everything, but why not just kill Polly? All he's gonna do is serve as a witness, and it takes more time to restrain him than to just break his neck. Pluton being revealed to be a battleship is giving me real great pirate Gonzok energy.
I really thought it was just gonna be a big bomb. Also click there to learn more about Gonzog.
Episode 244.
I like when Luffy takes advantage of his rubber body to do useful things like squeezing through the bars. To think all of this could have been avoided if Iceberg just used blueprints he didn't sign. Granted, they would have just killed him on the spot if he did. You know, if my name was Cuddy Flam, I'd change it to Frankie too. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't expect Iceberg and Frankie to be connected at all. Also, I didn't realize Sanji was missing from the main group until now. Presumably he's off doing some sort of side quest that'll be important later like he usually does. I like this gag where Luffy busts into the wrong room, and then he and Zoro bust into the right room at the same time. You'd think they would have seen each other, but this hallway has a weird intersection to it, where this hallway that leads right to Iceberg's room intersects with a perpendicular hallway.
I feel dumb because this episode's full of really important twists, and I'm sitting here talking about the logistics of Iceberg's floor plan.
Episode 245.
This episode does a really good job of showing the Straw Hats to be outclassed. Hell, the only reason Luffy's even still alive is because he's made of rubber. When CP9 says that the government's deadliest agents, they mean it. I said this before about Mantra and ended up being wrong, but the 6 powers being a technique instead of like a devil fruit power makes me think that eventually the Straw Hats will get them. Zoro already demonstrated the ability to do something similar to the Tempest Kick back on Sky Island, just with his swords instead of his feet. Granted, literally the same thing happened with Mantra and that never came to be, but placing so much emphasis on these martial arts powers being what makes CP9 so deadly makes me feel like there's going to have to be a way they work around it. Do you think Pauline normally carries this amount of knives on him, or is it because tonight's a special occasion? I like how the animation and voice acting really sells the fact that Robin doesn't want to be doing this. The look on her face, the fact that she spends the entire time looking out the window, the subtle hint of regret in her voice, it all just comes together to make me wonder why she's doing it, which is really good from an episode perspective.
Episode 246.
Lucci has the cat fruit model leopard. Chopper comments on it being a predator type zoan fruit and how those are the most brutal, but humans are also predators, Chopper. That means you also have a brutal fruit. The blend of the zoan type ability enhancement and the CP9 martial arts makes for a killer combo. I like Frankie and Usopp's interactions this episode. The way they're both so prideful yet kind to one another, with Frankie even offering to let Usopp dock the mirror in this little safe spot from Aqua Laguna. It gives some good dimensionality to Frankie, who easily could have become a one-note antagonist. I like the idea of Water 7 being built on top of flooded ruins of previous Water 7s. That's a fun little world-building detail. I also like that the Sea Train was built by Iceberg and Frankie's old mentor. With all that goodwill and passed down skill, it makes sense why Iceberg would be so popular. I feel bad that the Frankie family keep getting done so dirty.
I know that they're just henchmen, but they keep getting met with abject brutality way beyond their level.
This one's another sad one. The emotions and tension over the fate of the Mary is so good. And the ship goes from Skypiea being a manifestation of the crew's care for the ship? Heartbreaking. Speaking of, I looked up what a Kolbaudermann is because it sounds too German for a Japanese guy in his early 30s to think of. And they are a real sailor's myth, but any sailor who sees one is also said to be fated to die soon. So for Usopp's sake, let's hope that isn't true. With damage like that, I'm actually surprised the Mary lasted that long. That keel is almost split in two. I like that Frankie still thinks that the CP9 guys are just galley lost still, because he'd have no reason to suspect them of being a clandestine government organization.
But I do want to know what was going through his head when he saw Bluno there.
Episode 248.
The emotional whiplash of last episode being so sad and then this one being so heartwarming, just, you can't do this to me. Also, props to Frankie, he's the first person to get past that iron body technique. I really like young Frankie and Iceberg, and Tom is really cool too. I especially like the bit where he says he can't teach Cuddy Flam to make a pirate ship because the only difference between a pirate ship and a marine ship is what flag they're flying.
And the fact that he built Gold Roger's ship is really interesting.
Especially since he's a fishman that happens to have tattoos that remind me a lot of Arlong's chest tattoo. I can't believe they got her. They even got Kokoro. Is no one immune to the big tits, small waist virus? It's only brief, but I like seeing the young versions of characters like Polly and Mozu and Kiwi, and the way Tom's workers stand so triumphantly and happy. Oh, they earned this. I can't wait to see how this turns sad.
Episode 249.
Yep, there's the sad I was looking for. Yo, fuck Spandam. All my homies hate Spandam. He looks like the the human equivalent of a scarecrow. And he's the one that pitched reviving a weapon of mass destruction to the government. He's like Oppenheimer if Oppenheimer was a jerk. Which isn't to say that Oppenheimer was a flawless human being, but he was better than Spandam. This tragic backstory where Frankie learns a harsh lesson and his parental figure succumbs to a gruesome fate has lasted over the span of multiple episodes now. So going back to that checklist from Skypia, I think we can welcome the Sea Train as the newest Straw Hat. After all, Tom is its parental figure too, and the Straw Hats need a new boat. But in all seriousness, I think this is one of my favorite flashbacks so far. I know I say that every time we get a new one, but this one does a good job at explaining small details in addition to the big picture stuff. Episode 250. This is such a fantastic episode to mark the quarterway to 1,000 point. I really like that the trial of Tom's workers takes up the whole episode. Seriously, from the moment it actually starts, we go pretty much the whole time until the Sea Train departs at the trial. And Tom's words about never disowning a ship that you've built go hand in hand with his philosophy on ships from a few episodes ago. Plus, Spandam gets his justice. Twice even. The way he calls Tom a fishman multiple times definitely seems negatively charged, so this is what he gets for being a racist. Damn, that Sea Train was built to last. It's not even taking a dent. Tom really is a great shipwright. Or was a great shipwright. But after these last 3 episodes, I wouldn't be surprised if Frankie ended up joining the crew. He fits the checklist. If you would ask me at the start of this arc, I would have said that he was the government plant because he's a cyborg, but I guess I'm pleasantly surprised. Episode 251. Are we sure that Chopper's a reindeer and not the goat? Look how cool he is. I love these 2 Sea Train workers gossiping about how they think the Frankie family are the government agents. It has good payoff when they're denied seeing who the agents actually are. But damn, does this series know how to pull at my heartstrings. She just wants her friends to be safe. This Buster Call thing sounds pretty bad. I don't doubt that the Straw Hats could take on a single Vice Admiral, but 5? Luffy can only punch so many people. It doesn't make sense that CP9 were just gonna leave Usopp before he started fighting against them. Even if he wasn't a pirate anymore, he would still be able to snitch on their existence, and they're a clandestine org. Robin's talk with Iceberg was so well acted and animated that I almost completely forgot that Mary got sent out to sea. Part of me was still holding out hope, but I guess this 100% means they really are getting a new ship. Episode 252. Why is it that every time someone affiliated with the government wears a coat, they wear it like this, with their arms not through the sleeves? I love how Lucci's bird also gets a coat. Chopper leading the charge while holding Zoro's sword is so adorable. And I love how while he's streaming for the others, he whispers that Usopp can join too, which made me laugh super hard when while everyone was chanting, the guy over here started whispering about Usopp too. I expect Luffy to get stuck, but Zoro too? I can't believe Sanji would risk getting caught just to satisfy his nicotine addiction. I think the funniest bit of this episode is Sanji's imagination, where he's the Prince Charming to rescue Robin's damsel in distress. Not to mention Sanji also gets his badass walk towards the departing train. This is why we let Sanji cook.
Water 7 is a long but good beginning to the saga. I like the way that things naturally rose from the low-stakes high drama of will the Frankie family get away with the money to the high-stakes high drama of why did Robin shoot Iceberg, and the intra-crew conflict among the Straw Hats is absolutely heart-wrenching. I love it! Usopp as a character has always had doubts in his own ability that he's had to overcome. Think back to Arlong Park, when he played dead trying to escape a fight until he stood up and won. Having the crux of his leaving the crew being a mixture of self-doubt and refusal of reality in regards to the Mary is just an absolutely wonderful way to increase the dramatic tension of the arc without blowing the stakes creep right at the beginning. And the whole mystery of Robin and CP9 is done super well. I also want to reiterate, I really just think Kaku and Lucci sound similar in the English dub. Lucci is obviously more gruff, but the two of them exist in a very similar vocal range, and I didn't think Kaku would actually be a secret government agent. If anything, I thought it would be Frankie. Think about it, he's a cyborg, which is technology we haven't seen before in One Piece. Who would have access to secret labs and technology? The government. Obviously, Frankie had an alibi when Iceberg was shot, but if the government can make one cyborg, they can make multiple. So if Frankie was a government agent, there could be any number of cyborgs just like him. As for Devil Fruits, the Door fruit is going in A tier. I think it has a lot of versatility in terms of movement, as we'll see later, but the combat capabilities of the fruit depend entirely on you being able to land an actual hit, as we'll also see later. Like all Devil Fruits, it depends entirely on the user to make it worthwhile. The Cat fruit model Leopard is going into B tier. Like all Zoans, it only enhances a user's existing strength, which for Lucci just so happens to be absurdly high already. You might also find it odd that I decided to split things up here, but there's quite a bit to cover this saga, and I had to break things up somewhere so I could talk about Special Episode 4, the End of Year Special Report, the Detective Memoirs of Chief Straw Hat Luffy, also known as the Boss Luffy Special. As you may have guessed from the title of the special, it was made to celebrate the oncoming new year. The previous 3 special episodes were all set in continuity, even if none of them were anything close to being canon, and they all brought extra locations and ideas that they played around with. Boss Luffy, however, takes a different approach by inventing a whole new setting outside of the Grand Line, and even outside of the One Piece world entirely. While concepts like Devil Fruit still exist, we get to see a plethora of characters brought back with new designs to fit in, since the new setting is based around Edo period Japan, and is creatively named Grand Japan. In the world of Grand Japan, we follow new takes on familiar faces. Luffy is a policeman, Usopp is his sidekick, Nami and Sanji run a restaurant together, Zoro is homeless, and Chopper is just some guy. Panda Man still hangs around in the background though. The special is also different in that it's split into two separate stories.
The first is incredibly basic. A new crime family headed by Buggy wanders into town and causes trouble. It's up to Luffy to stop them after his lunch break. Chopper is the only one willing to testify, and Luffy beats Buggy's crew, but they all escape. They take Onami hostage, but Luffy and Co manage to beat the whole gang easily.
All in all, it's an incredibly simple plot, and I could count the amount of jokes I laughed at on one hand if I was missing both of my thumbs. In fact, I'll share them with you. Luffy paying his restaurant tab with counterfeit money. Onami threatening God to help her stay in business. Gidatsu's jet punch only working once. Sanji kicking Buggy right in his buggy bombs. It's not a horrible way to spend 20 minutes, but then you realize there's still an entire half a special episode left because these things take up 2 broadcast slots.
The second half of the special brings us a few new characters, Vivi and Zoro, the latter of which saves the former from Buggy's gang. Luffy and Usopp also show up to help, but Zoro did the heavy lifting, so they just take Vivi to get patched up by their new doctor friend from the first half of the episode. Grateful, Vivi decides to work at the restaurant to show her thanks, and from there it's a pretty standard fish out of water story since Vivi clearly doesn't have much experience in the real world. Buggy's gang tries to capture her again, except this time they bribed Zoro to be on their side, but he also isn't a twat like Buggy, so he still saves her again. It turns out Vivi is the princess of Grand Japan, and everyone lives happily ever after.
Either half of the special would have been fine as its own little filler episode, something that Toei would go on to do when they wanted more holiday specials the next year, and that you'll also see me covering if you keep watching because they aired in the middle of Enies Lobby. But when you bundle the two together, it kind of drags on. Buggy is a fun villain, sure, but I can only handle so much of him getting his ass handed to him for so long. Recap Episode 2, also known as One Piece New Year Special. Special Report, Secret of the Straw Hat Pirates, aired on January 3rd, 2006, between episodes 253 and 254. There's a really big problem I ran into when I got to the point of reviewing this episode. I couldn't find any English subtitles, not even by fan groups. In fact, just finding this was almost impossible if it weren't for someone else doing it for me. Thanks Reddit user Generic Rocker. I also used your post to find the episode of Alabasta prologue. That means I have no clue what anyone actually said during it, or if there was any new dialogue at all outside of the opening. So let's just take a moment to acknowledge it's a recap episode that covers the Straw Hats joining the crew, and that I watched it and it was enjoyable as far as I could, and move on so we can go back to the shorts feed, especially since it's time for the Sea Train.
I'm watching all of One Piece for the first time and reviewing every episode.
Episode 253.
I love when One Piece just out of nowhere brings in a wacky character. He's clearly the strongest member of the entire government. Just look at how he takes on an entire train car of his own men. Sorry guys, Jerry here solos the verse. Well, if Sanji didn't get to him first. You can tell that Sanji's a straw hat because while trying to think of a plan, the circumstances change and he just says screw it. I also like that he took the time to write an entire dedicated love letter to Nami. Why on earth would they organize the train cars by who's strongest? What is this, an RPG?
Yeah, we're gonna shove all the weak guys in the back so anyone who breaks in has to progressively go through harder and harder levels if they want to reach us.
Poor Chimney. At least she has good eyesight, being able to spot Luffy from that distance. Seriously though, this visual is incredibly foreboding. If you grow up near the coast, you know tsunami warning signs, and that this means Water 7 is
Episode 254.
The amount of property damage Luffy and Zoro commit. These are people's homes. This isn't from the abandoned part of the city. Given the state of the bridge, Aqua Laguna would have done it anyways, but they still destroyed those homes. In all seriousness, every time Zoro says he can send something like his sword there, it just lends credence to the idea that he's gotta unlock Montera. He already has a built-in 6th sense. Shout out to Paulie and his non-devil fruit rope powers for saving the day. He may not be a straw hat, but he sure acts like one. Of course, Spondum's the kind of guy to have a white elephant as a pet. So fun fact about white elephants, typically they're a sign of prestige, but also a huge burden. The kind of thing that you give to someone that you hate. Which is also the origin of White Elephant Christmas Party, since you're supposed to re-give things you don't use from your home.
Episode 255.
I love Sanji's just act like you belong approach to invading the next train car, but the fact that it almost worked is what gets me. I also like Sanji's interactions with Frankie and Usopp. The way he's willing to say Usopp is dead to him, and then immediately beat Frankie up for hurting Usopp. When talking about the dangers that come after Enies Lobby, Nami mentions Marine HQ, which we've already seen in the Kobe and Helmeppo story, but also a new place called Impel Down, which is like a super prison. Do you think Arlong taught her about them? Because he didn't seem like the education type. Look, I think we can all agree that Kokoro having a second hidden sea train is kind of an ass pull, but I'm down for it. The Frankie family begging to come with to save their boss is I don't know. These guys are already so far out of their league, I don't know what they're gonna do. These guys are gonna take on the world government?
Polly, you son of a gun, stashing away on the sea train. That little rascal.
Episode 256.
Is there anyone that didn't stow away on the sea train? They should rename it from Rocket Man to Stowaway Central. Seriously, how the hell do you let 4 people sneak onto your train during a high-stakes mission? This whole time I've been wondering, who turned Frankie into a cyborg? It turns out he did it by himself. In a cave with a box of scraps. Okay, I'm not so sure about the cave part, but I'll never give up the chance to quote Iron Man. Also, this emotional moment between Iceberg and Frankie is really good. I like that the Galley Law guys thought that the assassins were just some schmucks from the seedy part of town. I like there being different breeds of these bulls, since the ones that people ride around in were explicitly mentioned to be Yagaras, and these ones are king bulls. But where the hell were the Frankie family keeping those?
Episode 257.
Why the hell did everyone think that regular old cannons were going to work against a wave that can topple buildings? You're gonna need at least a buggy ball if you want to take that thing down. Or, you know, the combined power of the strongest Straw Hat and Zoro. This scene would be really cool if they didn't play twice in a row thanks to the presumably removed commercial break. But I am also adding this to my list of One Piece themed roller coaster ideas that I hope exist somewhere. I like how Luffy knows he wouldn't be able to stop Sanji from trying to rescue Robin, so he just tells him to go ahead. Damn, Usopp just killed that guy. Oh, wait a second, that's not Usopp. It's a bold move to have Usopp walk off into the proverbial sunset and then immediately introduce his Sniper King guy to replace him. Wherever Usopp winds up, I just hope he makes it off the train safe.
Episode 258.
I deadass thought that they replaced the opening theme with the Sniper King theme. Look, he may just be here because Usopp slipped off the train and died and they needed a replacement, but he's so cool. Seriously, Nami shouldn't be changing in a train car full of people she doesn't know. I do like that all the Straw Hats got outfit variations and not just Nami. Like Luffy gets his black shorts and Chopper gets a little jacket, and holy shit, Zoro owns a 3rd shirt. I like that the dial upgrades Usopp added to his arsenal before he died were also added to Nami's. Still is a shame he had to die though. I like how they've been showing this guy as like a potential threat that the train crew might have to face, only to unceremoniously set him out to sea. I also think it's hilarious that since Frankie turned himself into a cyborg, he just couldn't reach his back half. It makes sense, but in like a completely unexpected way.
Episode 259.
I don't hate Ramen Kempo guy because he uses noodles for weapons. I hate Ramen Kempo guy because he secretes noodles out of his nose. I like the detail that Sanji only uses kicks during combat because he just respects the art of cooking that much. But he's got a point. You can't start a food fight without expecting to get stabbed. So does Frankie just hit this pose every time he's got a fight? Because that's some dedication to the craft. I can't believe they smormood CP9. Oh my god, Sniper King's really just taking everything from Usopp. He's even got the Octo Slippers. I'd also be pretty shocked if someone I didn't know knocked on the window of a high-speed train saying they were there to rescue me. I get that Rocket Man is only getting faster and wetter, but Luffy has already climbed out onto this section multiple times. I don't get why he would have trouble now. If only Usopp were alive to see any of this. Rest in peace, Usopp.
Episode 260.
I like how this Cypherpole guy thinks that Robin's just messing with him when she's hiding Sniper King under her cloak, and Sanji ending his fight with Ramen guy like a true chef is just chef's kiss. But the real star of this episode is Frankie, who gets 2 transformations. He obviously has no choice but to go to Frankie Invincible. But since lying on his back is no way to win a fight, behold, the incredibly hilarious Frankie Centaur. I don't know how this is going to help, but I know that it will. The Rocket Man gang also gets some pretty good moments when they encounter the detached train cars from the Puffing Tom. I especially love the dramatic shift in select colorization when Zoro just cuts the train cars in half. And the way that everyone is shocked. It's comedy gold. I can't believe they're setting up a return for Captain T-Bone and also doing it so effectively.
Episode 261.
It's only T-Bone's fierce tenacity and generous spirit that made him Andy's dead. I do like the train car halves being turned into boats as an excuse for how the Straw Hats didn't kill anybody. I can excuse Sniper King not being caught because he's doing the arms thing. Nico Robin could easily just be messing with this guy. But the tip of his nose is poking through her hair. Oh my god, I thought Sanji's fight was over. One good thing did come out of this fight continuing though, and that's the reveal that Sanji has plastic surgery kicks. Truly, Sanji's skills are some of the most versatile of the Straw Hats. Right behind Nami, Robin, Chopper, Usopp, rest in peace, and sometimes Luffy. If there's one thing I gotta say about Frankie, it's that he's great at making an entrance. Bet that'll get the CP9 guys talking at the water cooler the next day.
Episode 262.
Damn, Lucci is ruthless. Dedicated to his job though. Robin is the one person in the entire world who, if he suspects she's fucking with him, could reasonably have 4 legs. Sniper King just immolated this guy for no reason. Sanji calls out Usopp's name when Robin hurts Sniper King. Is he stupid? Speaking of Sniper King, he really hits him with that mid-air backflip smoke bomb combo. This is his neutral air and it works. Well, almost works. Also, I love Frankie making the sacrifice play. As much as he puts up a gruff exterior, he very clearly has a kind heart. It's just a shame that the door fruit is a little less funny than I remember. In other news, Yokozuna's still doing his job of trying to stop the train. Come on, man, Tom's not even on this one.
Episode 263.
Robin knowing firsthand the pain of a Buster call and trying to prevent that pain for her friends. It's so sad. The emotional whiplash from contrasting that very sad first half of the episode with the kind of adorable Yokozuna fighting Luffy to save Kokoro. It's almost too much to handle, and also a convenient excuse as to why Sanji and Sniper King don't get run over by Rocket Man. I understand how and why the Sea Train would have an eternal Post-Enies Lobby, but what are the Frankie family gonna do? Just guess their way there? Do they just happen to own an eternal pose to a government compound? Speaking of, I like the eternal daylight aesthetic of Enies Lobby, but what the hell is this adventure in the ocean's naval-ass pit? I also like Frankie and Robin's little talk where Frankie equates her life to his ships. Out of context, that would be a little tasteless, but with the added benefit of knowing Tom's philosophy on ships, it's actually really heartwarming.
I decided to split the Sea Train into its own segment this video because, as far as I'm aware, there are only 4 official non-filler arcs in this saga. Long Ring Longland, Water 7, Enies Lobby, and Post-Enies Lobby. That said, the Sea Train is a very fun setting for the race to save Robin, and a couple of memorable one-off characters are introduced, like Jerry, who everyone must love because the Jerry short is, as of writing this, my highest viewed video and it isn't even close. Bit of an update on that, it got blown out of the water by Toriko. One other thing I want to mention here is that the Sniper King theme is actually incredibly different lyrically in English versus the original Japanese. If you can bear with my god-awful singing for a moment, here's what it would sound like as a direct translation rather than a localization.
On the Sniper Island, I was born. 100 shots, 100 hits. Lulu, la la loo. Even a mouse's eye, lock on. Even your heart, lock on. The man from the Sniper Island, Lulu, 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 la la. You'd better run. Sniper, Sniper King.
If that ended up being read dramatically slam poetry style, it's for copyright reasons. But as you can tell, there are a lot of significant changes made in the Funimation dub. I'm not gonna act like one of those weirdos that thinks a dub should stick to literal translations only, and in fact, I'm going to commend Funimation for the English version. Song localization is hard, especially with a language like Japanese with comparatively more syllables than English. As much as I like lines like 100 shots, 100 hits, nothing in the spirit of the song was changed by replacing it with "When I take aim, it's swift and true." And the change lets the lyrics flow much better with a more consistent rhyme scheme than having to hold out the word born for that long. And adding aims true to replace the ooh in the Japanese version's pronunciation of Sogeking is a brilliant way to extend the final line to fit the song. In the end, both versions are great for their own reasons and everyone involved gave it their best, which is what really matters. But it's about time that we moved on and talked about the second movie of the saga, the giant mechanical soldier of Karakuri Castle. As a follow-up to One Piece's most unique and darkest movie, Karakuri Castle had exactly one job: be anything but that. As much as a cult classic Baron Omatsuri and the Secret Island has become nowadays, it's the least One Piece that One Piece has ever been, and the incredibly dark and mildly disturbing visuals reportedly caused nightmares in the younger audience. When a series has a reputation for lighthearted adventures where darker subjects are, for the most part, hidden beneath the surface, embracing that darkness fully isn't exactly a recipe for success. None of the movie's specials or even the manga itself are produced in isolation. They all build off of and react to one another, something that is abundantly clear in how Karakuri Castle does its best to be as unlike the 6th movie as possible. I can talk bad about the movie all I want, and trust me, I will, but to understand what really makes this movie what it is, we're gonna have to take a look at the actual material it provides us.
The giant mechanical soldier of Karakuri Castle opens not with a giant mechanical soldier, nor with a castle. In fact, its opening is actually kind of similar to the opening of the Sky Island saga, just minus a massive shipwreck falling from the sky and plus one raging storm. This is also very quickly abandoned as the Straw Hats manage to abscond with a single treasure chest, inside of which is an old lady. But not just any old lady. An old lady that Luffy is ready to murder until she promises the treasure of her home island, a golden crown, to the Straw Hats should they return her there. Luckily, she has the only method of navigating to the island, a turtle pose.
This is the moment I understood that what we have in our hands is not another Baron Omatsuri or another dead-end adventure even. This is another cursed holy sword. The lack of build-up for a new concept is once again rearing its ugly turtle-shaped head, and I'm powerless to do anything but watch in horror as it unfolds. You could argue that the turtle turtle pose is pulling similar weight to the leaf sprouts from Omatsuri, but I would point out in return that the turtle pose has direct attention to pull to how unusual and weird it is, whereas the leaf sprouts were left for the audience to interpret how they played into the larger mystery. The turtle pose is directly telling you something weird is happening and it involves turtles, instead of letting you figure it out for yourself.
The Straw Hats follow the turtle pose to Mecha Island, who instantly activate their defenses and rescue the old lady who they presume is a hostage being held by pirates. The Mary is also severely damaged by faulty inventions, which leaves the Straw Hats stranded. Still in desire of the treasure they were promised, they park in a secluded area and attempt to solve a riddle they overheard in the form of a folk song while they were approaching. Luffy solves the riddle by sheer accident. Twice. This gets the Straw Hats invited to the castle of the island's regent and the man who makes all the massive mechanical inventions, Ratchet.
A small detail I actually really enjoy about this movie is that Ratchet styles a lot of his inventions like toys, at least here early on. While the meta reason for it was that this movie is made for children, the in-universe reason actually gives a little depth to the movie. Ratchet's father died when he was young, so building the design philosophy of his inventions around childhood objects is a very fun piece of characterization for him, until they completely drop that aspect and have humanoid-made robots and a heavy industrial style instead. I suppose that if we look at it from a different angle, the toy to industrial style transition can also be interpreted as Ratchet dropping the facade of innocence that he puts forward to the Straw Hats and to the residents of Mecha Island, but we'll explore more of that when we get to it.
The Straw Hats agree to team up with Ratchet to solve the next part of the riddle and venture forward into the cavern that Luffy accidentally uncovered earlier. The big group comes across a trap that looks straight out of those god-awful Resident Evil movies, and Luffy forces them to charge in head first, thought second. This leads them to a pond surrounded by statues of various animals and a wall with the next part of the riddle. Robin deciphers it and says the pond needs to be drunk. Luffy and Chopper immediately drink as much as they can of that rank standing water. Think of the bacteria, Luffy! There is actually one specific animal statue, and Luffy accidentally knocks it over. The big drinking bird, and you'll never guess what it does. With the water drained, there's an open path at the bottom of the pond, but also the second half of the riddle involves striking a green forest with lightning. Luffy gets stuck and proceeds to send Sanji with Robin and Chopper when they go to check out the new pathway. The process of freeing Luffy unveils a green spear, causing Nami to groan because of a pun that works much better in Japanese. Striking the spear with lightning wakes up the island right as Robin and Chopper both realize what it really is.
By the way, this whole movie is filled with just an incredible amount of Japanese puns and wordplay. The solution to every stage of the riddle is actually a play on words in Japanese, and even the name Mecha Island is a word scramble, because in Japanese, mecha spelled backwards is turtle.
Turns out Ratchet knew there was no treasure and wanted to wake up the turtle so he could use it as a tool of world domination, somehow. I'm still not quite clear on the details other than it being big. To accomplish this, he returns to his castle and deploys a massive mechanical tendrils to the turtle's limbs. The Straw Hats obviously don't like that and go to stop him, getting trapped almost immediately upon entering his control center castle. This leads to an unearned emotional beat with Ratchet's mom, the old lady from the start of the film, and then the Straw Hats get started saving the day.
This is where the movie's fight scenes get shoved in, but it's done absolutely atrociously. Instead of letting one fight play out then moving to the next, or even intercutting the fights in a reasonable manner, things get intercut kind of wackily. Now, intercutting isn't inherently bad. The actual series does a lot of it. It's the easiest way to show all the characters undertaking their action moments without ignoring the others. But whereas the anime and manga do it to avoid going multiple episodes without showing specific characters progressing, a movie with a much less ambiguous runtime doesn't have that issue to deal with, and the end result is that Karakuri Castle leaves out important developments in the action to have snappier cuts back and forth. Sanji and Zoro of course win their fights. Zoro's fight is a little more interesting to me because it takes place on a roller coaster, but Sanji's fight leads him and Robin to the castle's control room, where they proceed to just destroy everything in sight in a vain attempt to get the tendrils to withdraw.
The main action of Luffy vs. Ratchet involves the former destroying the latter's mech suit, then his next mech suit, then his third mech suit doesn't have the right extension cord. Ratchet eventually tries to crush Luffy, accidentally activating a power-up. Ratchet is defeated, but the tendrils are still steering the turtle, aiming directly at a nearby island with a collision course. With no other resort, the Straw Hats all work together to get Luffy spinning as fast as possible so he can buzzsaw straight through the castle. The day is saved, the turtle lays some eggs, and they hatch, leaving behind the real treasure of the island, a giant eggshell made of pure gold. The Straw Hats hitch half a shell to the Mary and set sail for Water 7, and everyone lives happily ever after, save for the fact that the shell sinks halfway there.
I'm just gonna let it rip. This movie is on the same tier as Chopper's Kingdom and Cursed Holy Sword. It utterly lacks the depth of a movie like Baron Omatsuri while also missing the key factors that made a movie like Dead End Adventure so fun. Finding itself in an awkward space where any significantly interesting ideas are either tossed aside or only brought to light in the last 20 minutes of the movie, which is also conveniently when the premise of the treasure hunt is completely abandoned. Imagine if in Indiana Jones, after the Nazis opened the Ark of the Covenant, that the next half hour was spent trying to put the lid back on instead of them all just immediately melting, and that the way to get to the Ark in the first place was a bunch of puns. The whole angle of the answer to the riddle is a bunch of Japanese language puns is incredibly dissatisfying to me as an international viewer. Now, that's not saying a lot, because this is a movie made for an audience in a completely different time, completely different place, in a completely different language who happen to love puns as a culture. So really, this is just me complaining for the sake of complaining. To be fair, One Piece already was globally distributed by 2006, even if it was thanks to 4Kids. I can only imagine the horror that would spawn if they try to dub this movie too. Speaking of 4Kids, Karakuri Castle was almost certainly made with that age demographic in mind. Baron Omatsuri wasn't received well by younger audiences who drove merchandise sales more prominently in that era, so they swung too hard into making sure children wouldn't be alienated by leaning into the aforementioned pun riddles and keeping the tone of the movie incredibly light, even in its most tense moments. Which is also kind of funny because the amount of adult fan service in Karakuri Castle is off the charts. Every time Nami so much as breathes, her boobs act like two colliding Gmod physics props, and when the Straw Hats meet Ratchet for dinner, her and Robin wear outfits I don't think I'm allowed to show in full on YouTube. That said, Nami's outfit when they enter the cave is designed to look like Lara Croft, which is a piece of fan service I think is properly implemented given the whole overarching adventure and treasure hunting theme. Treasure hunting films usually have pretty simple messages. Raiders of the Lost Ark's message is don't play God. The Goonies is about the power of friendship and how country clubs are evil. The theme of Lara Croft Tomb Raider is that Angelina Jolie is attractive. With that in mind, what do you think the creative team between Karakuri Castle is trying to say? This isn't rhetorical. Pause the video and don't hit play again until you've typed up at least one sentence in the comments. I'll wait. Also subscribe while you're down there. Personally, I think the theme of the movie is about respecting nature. The big bad of the film literally wants to use evil mechanical tendrils to force a living creature to bend to his will, and the ultimate treasure of the movie can only be attained by ensuring nature takes its course. The people of Mecha Island have lived in harmony with the turtle for over 1,000 years before Ratchet took over. The duty to awaken the turtle was passed along to men in his family all the way up to him, even if his father did die young and before he could impart the full duty. Ratchet does, in that regard, fit well into the theme of respecting nature. Like a halfway decent villain, his goal stands opposite of the theme. Gone are the days of living peacefully on the turtle's back. It's time to strap tendrils to that son of a gun and steer her directly to the nearest landmass, because that'll take over the world somehow. The raised stakes of a worldwide threat, plus the nature versus industry elements, put Karakuri Castle about on par with your average Captain Planet episode, only with a lot more cleavage, unless there's something going on in Captain Planet that I don't know about. And that is, at least in my opinion, what makes the giant mechanical soldier of Karakuri Castle such a disappointing movie compared to its predecessors. Baron Omatsuri and the Secret Island was rife with depth and subtext that you could spend a dozen hours picking at and just barely scratch the surface. And the villain of the movie oozed charm and menace in spades. Let's look at one scene from each movie that both fit more or less the same purpose. In Baron Omatsuri and the Sacred Island, Omatsuri puts up a facade of niceness that he uses to lure pirates into his deadly trap. From the moment he's introduced, there's no question that he's the villain, but he keeps up the facade of hospitality right until the final ordeal of hell. There are dozens of hints towards his true nature the entire time he's around, but when he does the grand reveal of his plan, it's very personal. The Straw Hats have all been swallowed by the Lily Carnation and only one remains. It's a very personal and serious moment with bold use of negative space in the visuals to emphasize the tension and hopelessness of the situation. In the giant mechanical soldier of Karakuri Castle, Ratchet reveals his evil plan using a megaphone. It's interrupted multiple times by the Straw Hats, who express shock not at his plan, but at the large turtle, with them seeing Ratchet as nothing more than a joke. And the Straw Hats, who aren't present, all have to get their turn to exclaim surprise at the giant island being alive. The art of the scene isn't given any special emphasis, leaving exposition and humor to take precedence over all else. It's a scene painted to tell the audience everything after spending the whole movie telling the audience everything. The contrast between movie 6 and movie 7 points to a production driven by maximizing appeal at the contrast of artistic expression, a decision to put the audiences most willing to purchase cheap merchandise as the first and only priority, and by that I mean children and horny people. I'm not really a big fan of this movie, so let's just end with a bunch of random observations in the form of a numbered list. 1. I can count the amount of jokes I laughed at with one slightly mutated hand. I kept a tally on my watch through. I laughed 6 times. Here's a description of each joke and roughly how far they are into the movie. 2. There is a stunning lack of giant mechanical soldiers. There's a pretty big mechanical castle, a giant non-mechanical turtle, several huge at best mechanical suits, a trove of pretty big mechanical archers, and an army of regular-sized mechanical maids, but no giant mechanical soldier. 3. Chopper sounds different in this one. If you watch Karakuri Castle, you'll notice that Chopper doesn't sound the same as he usually does. That's because his normal VA, Ikue Otani, was on maternity leave during this period of One Piece production, meaning that Chopper's interim VA, Kazue Ikua, voiced him this time around. This is easiest to notice with the different voices for his different forms. Kazue Ikura gives him a noticeably wider range of differences. 4. The character designs are certainly something. I already lightly touched on Robin and Nami's new thread,
threads, but just take a look at Ratchet. His overall straps have nipple windows, and his glasses have windshield wipers. Aside from that, none of the Straw Hats are really given anything special for their new outfits, breaking a trend that's been around since the second movie. 5. Luffy's powered up form. This movie came out during the middle of the Water 7 saga before Enies Lobby had been animated, which means that this is the first animated version of Luffy's special transformation. The movie also takes place prior to Water 7, meaning that this movie would serve as an explanation for how he developed said technique. If I had a nickel for every time a Toei movie for a popular anime used an upcoming special form that had debuted in a manga but hadn't aired on TV yet, I would have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. 6. The turtle itself. The giant turtle is rendered in 3D animation, which works well when combined with its limited amount of screen time to give it an otherworldly vibe. It doesn't quite fit in with the film's world, giving it an aura of mystery that doesn't get or need explained. One of the few things the movie decides is worth showing instead of boasting. 7. The parody angle. After watching this movie twice and writing this whole review, I decided to look around at what other people had to say and found a somewhat popular idea that the movie was poking fun at the first 5 One Piece movies by taking their tropes and turning them on their heads. The villain makes dumb decisions and has a nonsensical goal, so nobody takes him seriously. The side characters that are normally shoehorned in as pseudo-protagonists are barely present in the movie, and multiple moments that could be played straight are played for laughs instead. I fully understand where this reading of the movie is coming from. It even builds off the same "none of these movies were produced in isolation" idea that I put forward earlier, but I personally disagree with it. The parody angle and my "it's made for small children" angle both take the same approach of analyzing the film as a piece of media reacting to its predecessors, but differ in how clever we think the creative team behind it was. Or I should say, how unrestrained the creative team behind it was. See, as much as I like Baron Omatsuri and the Secret Island, in addition to the reaction from younger audiences, the movie just didn't make as much money as the others. Films 1 through 3 were released as double features, so we can't accurately say how much they contributed to their box office, but movies 4 and 5 have their own data. Dead End Adventure grossed nearly $15 million, and Cursed Holy Sword came in at almost $13.5 million. Baron Omatsuri came in at just under $10.5 million. Imagine this. You're a Toei executive. You see the bold experimental One Piece movie that you greenlit made less money than the previous 2 that were rather risk-free. Do you greenlight another bold piece of storytelling that pushes the series' boundaries, or do you tell people working on the next one to make it as family-friendly and by the numbers as it can get? The creatives on the movie may have still grumbled and said, "I'll show you by the numbers." But if they did, it really reads as too genuine and not exaggerated enough to come across as parody or satire. Yeah, the tropes are there, and yeah, they play around with them a little bit, but not to a huge extent. Foolish villains have always been treated like fools until they cause harm, side characters have always been unearnedly dramatic, and there's always been serious moments sidelined for laughs. Just because these moments are present doesn't make them self-aware, it just makes the movie worse. Look, I've made it clear, I don't enjoy this movie. It might be because it doesn't stack up to what came before, or it might be because it just isn't good. That's something that you're gonna have to determine for yourself by watching it on your own. My opinions are fairly meaningless, and it's perfectly fine if you think I'm a massive idiot for disagreeing with you. And I think that's all I have to say about the giant mechanical soldier of Karakuri Castle. We're gonna head back to the shorts feed again, but this time we're getting into the good stuff with Enies Lobby. I'm watching all of One Piece for the first time and reviewing every episode. Episode 264. Well, I can definitely tell that the rest of CP9 are highly trained assassins, especially this guy with the zipper mouth. Look, these guys are only in the episode for like 2 minutes, I can't make a judgment call on them, but it's not a great first impression. Finally, 2 powerhouses meet. Luffy and Sniper King. I like that Luffy and Chopper are so enamored by Sniper King that they literally ask for his autograph. I don't get how no one else is impressed. He's Sniper King from Sniper Island. With their powers combined, the government doesn't stand a chance. Everything will be solved with the power of teamwork. And Luffy's already gone. I almost forgot to mention, there's a new intro that so callously uses the Mary still. And I don't normally comment on them, but there's a new outro too, which I like because it showcases people's fan art of the show. I always love when a big series shines a spotlight on its fans. Episode 265. Literally the entire first 5.5 minutes is pure recap, up to 6 minutes even. And it's only 9 minutes into the episode that we actually get to new material. But that new material is pretty good. I especially like Luffy Friend Robot. Can we get Dory and Bragi? We have Dory and Bragi at home. Dory and Bragi at home. I'm not saying that Oimo and Kashi here have bad character designs. I'm just saying that they don't benefit from being the second duo of giants introduced into the story. Since I didn't mention it last time, the size of those gates of justice is terrifying. This episode's really only half an episode long, so I don't know what else to say. I understand why it's like that, I just wish it wasn't. Episode 266. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is the first time we've seen actual devil fruits on screen since Luffy ate his gum fruit. I'm a big fan of the Frankie family and Galley Law using the power of teamwork to take down the giants, especially because the Frankie family needed this W after the day they've been having. I also love that they
took the time to put tank treads on the King Bulls. I really like this animation for Robin's darkest moments, especially the rays of darkness that contrast this scene directly before where Luffy is surrounded by rays of sunshine. It is a very artistic way to show that the Straw Hats are the hope that Robin needs right now. And also this scene where the Cypher Pole agent gets knocked out before he can give an accurate casualty count is funny. I will also say these extra CP9 guys are starting to grow on me. Giving them more than just a few minutes to display their character traits is doing wonders.
Episode 267.
Serious props to Frankie. In a room full of assassins, he had Spondum's head in his mouth for a full ass minute. If 2 heads are better than 1, then 3 must be the best, am I right?
I'm pretty sure the show is past the point where dude with 3 heads doesn't even tip the weird scales anymore.
I love it when the Straw Hats other than Luffy have their dumb smart moments, especially when it's stuff like Zoro's genius plan to launch Rocket Man over the gate, followed by him saying his landing strategy was to fall. I feel bad for Oimo here. Rocket Man does not have crumple zones. That thing left a dent in his spine. He'll never walk again. This is not what I was expecting when they said that they were sending watchdogs. I like the Frankie family serving as essentially the Straw Hats foot soldier regiment. Them plus Gallilaw is actually a really fun combo to watch fight all the Marines.
Episode 268.
I love Luffy accidentally baiting the Marines into knocking themselves off a cliff. So iconic. When do Usopp get here? How'd he tag along? Do you think Sniper King helped him? The indiscriminate AoE attack. The bane of all games with friendly fire enabled. I can excuse Spondum abusing Frankie, but punching Robin is where I draw the line. A lot of the Straw Hat interactions this episode are pure gold, especially these bits where Zoro and Sanji argue about who is and isn't a henchman. I think my mind is purposely trying to block out the existence of these watchdogs. Seriously, why couldn't they just ride horses? I guess they would be less memorable if they rode horses, but it's still an odd choice.
Episode 269.
This is officially the Spondum Haters Club. Like and subscribe if you hate Spondum. I do actually think that Spondum's a really good villain, specifically because he's like the exact opposite of the villain we had last time. Whereas Eneru had a god complex and power to back it up, Spondum here has an inferiority complex and also is weak. His strength specifically comes from his position of command. If he didn't have guys like Lucci just barely under his grasp, then he would have nothing. Which is why I'll always laugh at Frankie sticking Spondum's head in his mouth. Outside of that, the Straw Hats riding on the King Bull is pretty fun. I really like how casually they all treat getting shot at. But I can't believe they forget Sniper King! I also like the setup for Luffy versus Bluno, but even Frankie could beat Bluno in a 1v1, so this isn't gonna last too long.
Episode 270.
Our brave Sniper King boldly awaiting an opening to strike, and even so compassionate as to engage with the tears of a fallen enemy. Sniper King is a true hero. I can't believe Usopp just butts in while Sniper King's having a conversation with Oimo. It works out for the better since Sniper King doesn't know Dory and Brogy, but it's still rude. Speaking of rude, the government tricking Oimo and Kashi into working for them is also pretty rude. 50 years is a sixth of a giant's lifespan. That would be like an American working pro bono for 12 years. I've been wondering why the King Bulls were named Sodom and Gomorrah, but then I remembered that the Bible exists, so the Frankie family's probably just Catholic. This is what I'm talking about when I say Bluno doesn't stand a chance against Luffy. Bluno just thinks he's hot shit because Lucci managed to beat Luffy.
Episode 271.
I know he didn't do it to himself this time, but that's another one for the counter. I love that devil fruits just canonically taste horrible. Incredible, possibly world-threatening power, if you can stomach the god-awful taste. This whole time, I have been kinda curious what happens if you eat 2 devil fruits, and I guess exploding is a valid world-building option. I like how Lucci says it's not about what devil fruit power you get, but how you use it, because that's something incredibly true with the devil fruit users that have been shown in the series so far. You get some devil fruit users like Bluno who make the most of a subpar fruit, compared to some devil fruit users like Wapple who has an amazing fruit but is terrible at using it. I am excited to see what powers Kaku and Khalifa end up with though.
Episode 272.
I don't know how Oda does it, but here I am, feeling super bad for a pair of giant fish. Look at how happy and wiggly they were. At least Zoro and Sanji are there to support it in its time of need. I really like the way that Spondum is animated. Everything that goes on with his face is just really well done to sell the fact that he's a jerk. That being said, Funkfried is such a silly name for an elephant that I actually kinda love it. I can't believe the power to invoke Robin's childhood trauma lies entirely in this weird gold snail. The Luffy versus Bluno fight has lasted a fair amount of episodes now, so it's about time that they put an end to it. And also, I think it's about time that I did this.
I did the post slightly wrong, but here it is.
I'm very easily persuaded by people asking me to do something for a month straight.
Episode 273.
I really like how the second gear transformation stems from Luffy realizing he's been coasting by on his existing strength. Figuring out a way to get stronger was an inevitability, but what makes this transformation so good is it's not the only power-up Luffy gets in this fight. I'm gonna be honest, I thought if any of the Straw Hats were gonna unlock the 6 powers, it was gonna be Sanji, because he's the martial arts guy. I also think the ending of the fight is really good because Bluno is consistently blatantly demonstrated that he underestimates his opponents and lets them get hits on him that they otherwise shouldn't. So having him stand there unconscious because he tried to tank a hit he shouldn't handle is the perfect way to end it. Also, I love the Frankie family running interference on the judge fight. Damn, Zombie's got some grip strength. There's something amazing about Luffy winning his fight than immediately shouting out for Robin. He just finished kicking ass, and that's his way of saying that he's not done yet until he gets his friend back.
Episode 274.
Damn, Frankie's got a dump truck. The strangest part about this bit where Frankie inflates his butt is that thanks to the second movie, it's not even the first time there's been a fart-related inflation joke in One Piece. Usual disclaimer of I'm watching the dub applies, but I think that this moment where Robin shouts out that she just wants to die is incredibly well acted. Stephanie Young gives consistently great performances as Robin, and this is one of them. Of course, it is also helped by the fact that Toei did a good job animating the little micro-expressions in her face. But aside from that, I'm proud of directionally challenged Zoro finally learning the difference between north and up. This scene where CP9 and the Straw Hats are striking mirrored poses is so good.
The only thing that would make it better is if Usopp was there instead of Sniper King.
Episode 275.
Oh my god, it's happening, it's happening. It's another flashback episode. We finally get Robin's tragic backstory. That's not really something to cheer about, especially because it's especially sad, especially with this Cinderella-style abusive household she was stuck in. But there's some really good moments, like Robin studying hard enough to become a doctor at age 8, and Saul here cracks dad jokes. So him and his laugh are instant top 10 among flashback characters. I really do feel bad for Robin in this scene with the archaeologists, but I also understand the archaeologist's point of view, because they don't want a child they care about dying because of their knowledge. It's very sad when the one group that was accepting of Robin has to push her away just so she doesn't get hurt, which is a very interesting parallel to what she's doing to the Straw Hats at this point in the story.
It definitely makes the already great writing of this arc so much more interesting.
Episode 276.
I like that Robin's mom is just Robin but with white hair. Also, Olvia being an archaeologist that went out to sea to research poneglyphs. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the ancient tablet of immeasurable knowledge. Damn, those archaeologists don't fuck around. I guess when you have the world's biggest library, it's either burn down like Alexandria did or be ready to kick some ass. I really like this scene where Robin and Olvia pass each other with neither realizing who the other is. It really adds weight to this scene at the end where Olvia finally recognizes her daughter and can only cry because of how much time she's missed. Well, that and how little time they'll have together going forward. It's very brief at this point, but I like that Aokiji is involved, although he goes by Vice Admiral Kuzan at this point in time.
If Aokiji is there to oversee her trauma, it makes sense why Robin would be the most afraid of him specifically.
Episode 277.
For one glorious moment, I thought Spondine kicked the bucket here, but alas, he lives. Robin's like 8 and severely traumatized due to a lack of a mother figure in her life, so I'm not gonna blame her for shouting out that she knows how to read the poneglyphs, but like, that is the dumbest thing that she could do in this moment. It's dumb, but again, 8-year-old, traumatized, and it's a really sweet scene when they reunite. Clover here just straight up tells the heads of the government, I know what you are. They were already gonna get killed, but Clover straight up signed the death warrant for the entirety of Ohara. I like Saul being a Vice Admiral defector. It's nice to see that not all the Marine leadership are unthinking cogs in the machine.
I like that Robin's backstory is taking time to flesh everything out because this is episode 3 and we're still not done.
Episode 278.
I just love it when One Piece does its best to make me cry. Saul letting out one final there she while he's trying to comfort Robin in his final moments. My heart. The cruelty that Robin faced from the Oharans being the only thing that let her escape with her life, only to be met with more cruelty at every turn, and even people in the same boat as her willing to turn her in if it means saving their own skin. And just the whole mess of everything that was Crocodile all comes together to make a perfect moment where Robin's finally found the friends willing to stick by her and is finally able to say that she wants to live. The Straw Hats are literally willing to go to war with the government for her.
It is such a beautiful moment and the perfect way to cap off Robin's backstory. I'm watching all of One Piece for the first time and I just got to the long string of recap episodes in Enies Lobby.
As nice as it is to see the first intro again, none of these episodes really add anything substantive to the show, so I'm going to rank the Straw Hat theater shorts from the end of each episode. Up first is Chopperman. Chopperman is a bundle of adorability, S tier. Up next is Report Time. It's going in B tier. The only thing that saves it from being lower is that Zoro's pretty funny. Next we have Obahan Time. This one gets A tier. The concept is pretty funny, but it drags on just a little bit too long for my liking. Up next is Ruthless Time. This one isn't as funny, but for Choppolini alone, it gets S tier. And lastly, we have Monster Time. This one's another B tier. The character designs are all great, but a whole lot of nothing happens. And it's only saved by this punchline at the end. You can probably tell I have a Chopper bias,
But he's just too adorable for me to not have one.
Episode 284.
I like how the top secret blueprints for an ancient weapon literally just have its name written on them, just in case you misplace it. Or, just in case you want to prove that you're burning the real thing to the government. I love Frankie's reaction to realizing that the Frankie family came to save him too. I like that despite how macho he is, he's in touch with his emotions. I was wondering why Frankie was also falling during the recap episodes. If I wasn't beholden to international copyright laws, I would be playing Freebird right now. Damn, Somebody was going for the kill. I think the biggest twist this episode is that Chief Justice Baskerville is actually 3 dudes in a trench coat. Somehow that only makes slightly more sense than a dude with 3 heads.
Episode 285.
I forgot to mention it last time, but there's a new intro. It's not my favorite, but I like the way that it plays with the logo. Oh, I see. We have another gun dog situation on our hands, but this time it's an elephant sword. Who the hell keeps putting devil fruits in weapons? Rest in peace, Straw Hats. You will be missed. This whole ordeal with the potential keys to Robin's handcuffs makes for a pretty interesting setup, but as of right now, it's just that. Setup. We get to see the Straw Hat CP9 matchups that are gonna happen, but none of the actual action. And in Sanji's case, things I wish I could unsee. I do like Chimney just casually sneaking around though. And also Lucci noticing her but not saying anything. Just goes to show everyone hates Spondum, even CP9.
Episode 286.
I like how all the Straw Hats are handling their CP9 fights in their own way. Nami's just planning to pickpocket the key and run. Zoro immediately gets into the action. Sniper King does his best to avoid any action. And Sanji instructs Khalifa on how to make proper tea. I appreciate the instructions, but I'm not really a tea drinker, and also there are bigger things at stake here. We also get formal introductions to 2 new devil fruit powers. Jabra already displayed that he had zone type powers, but now we officially know that it's the dog fruit model wolf. He's so much bulkier than Chaka's jackal fruit. But there's also, as Kaku puts it, the limitless destructive power of the giraffe. I like how no one can take his giraffe powers seriously. But why is the giraffe a sub-fruit of the ox fruit and not the horse fruit? Damn, he wasn't lying. That giraffe really does have unlimited destructive power.
Episode 287.
This is your standard issue, everything goes wrong in anticipation of everything going right episode, but the way things go wrong is entertaining. I especially like how everyone in the room is against Sniper King and Zoro being handcuffed, even offering to uncuff them if they find the right keys. And Chopper just stumbling upon everyone in their times of hardship is adorable. Especially the way he just thinks Sniper King and Zoro are innocently waving at him. But he also gets his time to shine when he saves Nami from a frankly horrifying death. And of course, you can't forget the classic Luffy shenanigan of drowning. But I have to say, my biggest annoyance this episode is Sanji's fight scene with Khalifa. I get it, Sanji doesn't like hurting women, but come on, man, there are bigger things at stake here. This is why you got turned into a marketable vinyl figure. I can't believe they Funko popped Sanji.
Episode 288.
Lots of good moments this episode. I especially like how this third gear scene was handled. We don't actually get to see the transformation on screen, but the sound effects, music, and just the weight of the animation surrounding it does a great job of conveying how powerful it is. Not to mention itty bitty baby Luffy. He's so adorable. And Nami versus Khalifa seems like it could be interesting, but I'm afraid that they're only being paired up because they're both women. Frankie versus Fukuro is great, but I absolutely love when Chopper tosses Frankie the wrong drink. Farmer Frankie. Full Call of Frankie is handled very similarly to Gear 3, with impressive visuals and sound designs and announcing the weight of its impact. But unlike Gear 3, we also get to see Frankie kick some ass. I also love that Chopper's solution when his drugs were off is to lock Kabuki guy in the fridge. That thing was probably built without safety standards in mind. I have no doubt that lock is gonna last.
Episode 289.
I love that Frankie considers his cyborg body to be Battle Frankie 36. Most of the episode is taken up by Zipper Guy and Frankie fighting, which has some really good moments, like this whole silent as an owl punch to the gut where Chopper reveals he was just hiding behind a wall. I also like how despite Frankie being at a severe disadvantage under the water and in the air, he still manages to pull out a W. Latching onto Zipper Guy like me every time there's a cheesecake in sight is a great way to end the fight. The second he does it is essentially the second that he wins, even if he doesn't get the actual finishing blow until a couple minutes later. Aside from that, I like how Sniper King's master plan is just to pit Jabra and Kaku against each other. If these were real animals fighting, my money would be on the giraffe. I also like how Zoro's plans are dumb in a way that makes sense. Cutting off one of their hands would work, and using Sniper King as essentially a sword holster is effective, but at the same time, neither of those plans is something that a rational person would do unless they were desperate.
Episode 290.
Beyond the brief glimpse at Zoro using Sniper King as a sword, this episode primarily focuses on Chopper's fight with Kumadori. I like that Kumadori's control of his body comes from sheer force of will rather than some sort of fancy devil fruit. Devil fruits are fun, but sometimes it's nice to just see a dude with weird abilities that go completely unexplained. This episode also shows us why taking drugs is bad. I like that Chopper taking 2 Rumble Balls too quickly puts his power playlist on shuffle. It's a fun way to add a little difficulty to the fight. And the atmosphere of the burning room also heavily adds to the fight. But oh my gosh, 3-ball Chopper is insane. He goes from Sasquatch to Weichige. New theory, Chopper has the human fruit model cryptid. His fruit is one of the 2 zones so far to not have a specific model. If you compare his full human form to Kaku's full giraffe form, there's obviously some differences in how those are handled. The only problem with that theory is I don't know if a zone type fruit could have more than one animal at once. I just watched One Piece episode 290, finally watching 291, excited to see what happens with Chopper's big monster form. And it's the Boss Luffy special. At least Chopper's in it for about 30 seconds. That's a good consolation. Even if it is the Christmas special, I just think it's an odd choice to follow up a big cliffhanger with this. I say that, but this buggy design does go hard. And I like the return of Luffy's little song from Skypiea. And the little gag of Luffy carrying a baton but punching people instead of using it is also pretty funny. Actually, a lot of the little moments made me laugh. I just think I'd be more appreciative of this episode and how it uses established characters in a new way if it wasn't in the middle of a cliffhanger. It is nice to see Vivi again though, even if it is weird alternate reality Vivi.
Really, if this had aired as any episode other than 291, it would have been a great piece of filler.
Episode 292.
This episode is another Boss Luffy holiday special. I like this one a little more because it actually integrates the holiday into its plot rather than just having a tag at the last 30 seconds. And it's lots of fun to see characters I didn't expect to show up make an appearance, like Konus and Pagaya, and Miss Monday. The whole rice cake tossing tradition seems lots of fun too, a lot better than the hot penny version of the same tradition. And when Chopper's full but Sanji brings more rice cakes, his scream is so good.
Overall, very enjoyable. Again, I just wish it wasn't during the middle of a cliffhanger.
Episode 293.
Right off the bat, Chopper's big form is like horror movie stuff. An unflinching monster with overwhelming strength that you can't hurt and is just straight up mollywhopping you. Not to mention how this design would be so great as a horror movie monster. As for the other fight this episode, I was very afraid that Khalifa was gonna be naked the whole time. I'm glad she got dressed because I've got a YouTube video to make. I do like her power bang strength sapping soap suds, especially with the changing color for the line art for all the parts that get sudsed up, but also soap is just one of those things I never would have thought of as a fun devil fruit. I also like how the upgrade to Nami's climb attack has a little swinging end. It gives it a nice double utility as a magic rod and a flail. It's amazing how every word that comes out of Spondam's mouth just makes me hate him more. A+ villain writing. You can also tell that Luffy versus Lucci is going to be a good fight because Rob, this is my 9 to 5 Lucci makes this face.
Episode 294.
Of course, Spondam would press the golden snail by accident. This is why no one likes you, Spondam. What makes it worse is that he pretends it's intentional and then proceeds to tell thousands of people that they're going to be sacrificed. Come on, man, get a grip on your job. But hey, this is Marine HQ, which means there's a chance that we might see Kobe and Helmeppo again. Do you think that as a giant, getting crawled on like this feels weird? It's gotta feel like getting swarmed by ants, right? Also, Nami straight up calls Khalifa a bitch, which I was not expecting. Zoro also finally gives his new sword a name, the Great Blade Nose Storm. I also like how all the CP9 agents have custom transponder snails. Do you think they had an arts and crafts night, or did all the snails just happen to look like that?
Episode 295.
I like how Zoro's attack names are usually play on words like allure and onigiri. But as for the big fight this episode, at what point does this go from regular assault to sexual assault? For someone whose catchphrase is that's sexual harassment, Khalifa sure does toe the line. I can't believe Nami also got Funko Popped. I love the way that she wiggles around like a seal trying to dodge attacks. And also the Chopper interruption where Khalifa thought that he was Nami. Grade A mixture of humor and drama with Nami and Khalifa's perspectives both being displayed on it. I also like Nami generating a rainstorm to wash the soap off of her. The Climb Attack's new upgrades definitely complement her supernatural weather knowledge. I also like this new Mirage Tempo ability. Using it to create doubles that can take a hit is fun, but I don't think that this is how Mirages work.
Episode 296.
I like how goofy all the Mirage Namis look. It would be so easy to just have 5 plain Nami clones, so the Funhouse Mirror style is a really nice choice. The line, "You'd have to be a fool to disregard the navigator's forecast," goes so hard. Now that's what you call a winning blow. I like how in the small taste of Lucci versus Luffy, Lucci's not even stated to have something like mantra, he's just that guy. He hasn't even turned on his devil fruit yet and he's holding back Luffy. I also like that Zoro is the first to notice that Chopper's big form is having a bad effect on his health. Everyone else has either been too afraid or too busy to notice. Also, from Zoro and Sniper King's perspective, this is kind of a funny interaction. Frankie just shows up, knocks Chopper into the water, and then just immediately jumps after him. But hey, now that the cuffs are off, it's technically a 3v2. And if you count each of Zoro's swords, that's a 5v2.
Episode 297.
There's something so weird about Funkfried's head being at the end of the extending sword instead of the blade just being his nose. I like how Chimney's just been waiting in this box for random passerbyers to say, oh, how am I gonna get across these whirlpools? So this is who's been painting all those boxes in video games. I like Jabra being all tricky with the key. Dude heard about Red Riding Hood and was like, ah, so wolves are tricksters, definitely not pack hunters. I like Sanji coming in for the save against Jabra, mostly because of the way that he tells Sniper King that it's okay he can't fight Jabra, and forces Sniper King to come to the realization that crewmates specialize in different things for a reason. Guys, this might be a crazy theory, but I'm starting to think that Sniper King is Usopp. I will admit, Sanji pulling the "I'm the hunter" line as another allusion to Red Riding Hood is pretty cool.
Episode 298.
This episode primarily focuses on Sanji versus the big bad wolf. And by versus, I of course mean trouncing. Jabra got in like, what, 2 hits this fight? If it weren't for the iron body technique, Sanji would have ended this in a moment. I did like the canvas overlay and thick outlines on Jabra's fake flashback. It's a fun momentary departure from the usual style. But I think the coolest part of this fight is when Sanji uses friction to heat up his leg to the point that it's glowing hot, tanking the hit to smack Jabra in the face with it. If only he was better at talking trash.
God created food.
but the devil created spices.
No, that just doesn't work. The line doesn't even have anything to do with the fight other than the fact that Sanji is a chef. He needs to get Nami to give him improv lessons, because her lines are 1,000 times more on point.
Episode 299 has a large focus on Zoro versus Kaku.
I especially love all the weird, wacky uses Kaku is finding with his giraffe power. Come on, man, giraffes can't do that. But as much as I love Minecraft Giraffe, I think Pasta Machine Giraffe is my favorite. Especially how he brings out the swords and boasts about being a master of the 4-sword style. I like when Zoro's opponents are like, I have more swords than you. Like when he fought Hachi's 6 swords in Arlong Park. I also like how we get a larger glimpse at Luffy versus Lucci. Things have still really only just begun between them, but what makes it really great is how Luffy acts captainly. Basically ordering Frankie to go save Robin because he knows he can take on the fight. It really shows that as captain, he knows that this fight is his burden to bear, and how he trusts his allies to go save Robin. I'm probably not the first person to point this out, but it's kind of funny how every Saga's climax since Alabasta has been a countdown to disaster. At least they're not racing against a literal ticking time bomb this time.
300 episodes in, and I never fail to get shocked by these super cool moments. What do you mean Zoro can just grow extra heads? I know that the real reason Zoro wins this fight is his resolve to protect his friends, but I like to think it's actually because of the childish logic that more swords equals better fighter. Or maybe it's just multiples of 3. I also like this scene where Zoro tells Kaku he's fired. It's framed like Kaku genuinely feels remorse for what he did in Water 7. And the way that Kaku willingly gives up the key is done really well. And then this scene where Zoro willingly hands over the key to Sanji because he knows Sanji will get it to Robin faster. All of the action-packed moments against CP9 were great. And we're not even at the end with Luffy and Lucci pulling out their second forms. Frankie bursting through the door with the sun shining in on them, while Robin is literally holding on to dear life with her teeth. Folks, you may have bought the whole seat, but you only need the edge. Episode 301 starts off very dour, but I'll be damned if this ain't hype as shit. The wind carries his name from Sniper Island far away. Sniper King taking out all these Marines and delivering the keys is the second most impressive sniping feat in the series so far. I love how Spondum calls him a monster when he realizes the distance that he's sniping from. It really shows that even though he doesn't have the same physical strength as Zoro and Sanji, Sniper King is still super deserving of respect. The Robin Turbo Slap scene is so cathartic. This whole batch of episodes has just been nothing but amazing. There's still a big climb ahead, but if this ain't the peak, I look forward to the view when we get there, because I have no clue how you're gonna top this. Episode 302. I cannot for the life of me get over how much utility Frankie Centaur has. Between the junior CP9 ancient, Fukuro, and now terrorizing Marines, I'm starting to think Frankie was onto something. Or on something. This scene where the Tower of Law is crumbling is really cool. It's one thing to say the Marines are launching an indiscriminate attack, but that actually shows that, yeah, this is an indiscriminate attack. Especially when they follow it up by bombarding the entire main island. I also like the explanation for how Gear 2 actually works, with the whole blood pumping at an extraordinary rate thing. The whole contrast between Luffy and Lucci is really enjoyable. Especially the way Luffy's treating it like the life or death situation it is, and Lucci's just having so much fun that he's willing to kill everyone. Poor Chopper is still unconscious, tied to Granny Kokoro's hat so he doesn't get dropped again. He's gonna have trouble making it through that current. Episode 303. This one's another Boss Luffy episode. It's still fun to see these alternate takes on the characters, especially when Foxy gets hit with the unintentional Rube Goldberg of pain crafted by his own hand. He's like the only character for whom the heart does not grow fonder with absence. The actual story of the episode is filled with very fun references to Drum Island, but oh my god, the intro threw me off. For just a second, I thought I was teleported to a universe where One Piece had 2 extra characters I had never seen before. Turns out these guys are just the ones that sang the intro. Why they're here for the Boss Luffy special? Don't ask me, but that's who they are. I'll be honest, I spent this whole episode reading the Baroque Works cover story instead of paying attention. Episode 304. This episode has a really cool finisher, but before we get to that, I want to appreciate the portrayal of Robin's PTSD-induced panic attack. This was made years before that Puss in Boots scene, and the show has a tendency to get a little silly sometimes, so the fact that it's played so straightforward and emotional is just really nicely done. This episode also continues doing the great job of portraying Spondum as the villain that he is. He's so self-centered that even when Marine battleships are yelling not to shoot Robin, he's claiming credit for the bridge being safe. Oh, and this third gear thing. I absolutely love it. Luffy, the rubber hose incarnate, powering up by Tom and Jerrying his fist to a super size is just perfect. I genuinely don't think there's a better way to give Luffy a powered up form than by paying homage to the roots of his inspiration. Plus it means we'll get to see itty bitty baby Luffy again, and I love him. Episode 305. This whole Lucci flashback is really well done. Kid Lucci is so ruthless, man. I'm starting to think that the world government's concept of justice is a little flawed. Lucci getting scars in the shape of the world government's logo is so cool though. I like the detail that Sniper King is able to hear the rushing water before Sanji and Zoro are. It makes sense that he has better long distance perception because he's a sniper. Rest in peace, Straw Hats, Kokoro, and Chimney. You will be missed. I love how silly Gear 3 is. And pairing that silliness with a great power-up is amazing. Gear 3 is so strong that Lucci had to pull out the full leopard form. He also takes his shirt off, and all I'm gonna say is I've never seen so someone get more clothed when they're pushed in a fight. Episode 306.
It's the return of itty bitty baby Luffy!
I really like how the fight against Lucci has gone on for so long that both of Luffy's powered up forms have expired. Lucci's just one tough nut to crack. I also like how Lucci's able to slim down his man-beast form. In a similar vein, I like how Funkfried is able to control the various aspects of his elephant sword form. And Frankie smacking Spondum with his own elephant is so deserved. Spondum Haters Club, where you at? The best part about it though is that Frankie attacking Spondum and protecting Robin like this brings her back to the moment with her friends and pulls her out of her panic attack. I think one of the bigger points of narrative tension this episode also lies on the shoulders of Kashi and Oimo. I mean, literally on their shoulders. There are 3 marine battleships pointing at everyone who's trying to escape. And unlike the Straw Hats, they don't have an elderly mermaid to help them. Episode 307. I think it's very funny how Frankie and Robin were able to clear an entire evacuation ship in the space between episodes. I also like how nonchalant Kokoro is about the fact that she's a mermaid. Just casually explaining mermaid biology, much to Sanji's dismay. I love the gag of Sanji being in shambles because the first mermaid he met was Kokoro. He also gets another really funny gag where he finally gets his Prince Charming moment, only for Nami and Chopper to interrupt. I also love the confidence that Frankie has in the Frankie family to make it out safe. Or I guess I should say the confidence he had in the Frankie family to make it out safe. I know there's a decent chance this is another Pell scenario, but it's still shocking that nothing came to save them. Episode 308. I really like the direction that Luffy versus Lucci has ended up going. The two of them are both severely injured and giving it the last of their strength and willpower. At this point, it's not a contest of who can knock the other out first, but who can hold on to consciousness for the longest. A contest that unfortunately Lucci seems to be winning. We all know that Luffy's eventually gonna win, but the drama in the moment where the Straw Hats and Frankie are facing off against 200 Marine HQ captains really helps draw out the tension in this fight. As soon as it's done, they can all escape. Sure, the Straw Hats are winning now, but will they be able to hold out forever? The dual fight sequences make for a great narrative moment, especially here at the end where instead of Sniper King yelling out for a crewmate, it's Usopp yelling out for his friend. This is just an overall very well put together episode, especially now that we're at the climax of the climax. Episode 309. Usopp straight up challenging Lucci to a fight because he knows it'll get Luffy to pick himself back up. Now that is the face of bravery. Normally the power of friendship pulling the hero from the brink of defeat is one of those annoying tropes, but it works really well here, especially because it's been everyone's motivation this whole time. Plus the jet Gatling is really cool. As for the other Straw Hats fighting the Marines while that's going on, they're all pretty fun. The Berry Fruit guy is pretty silly, but this Rust Fruit guy straight up destroys one of Zoro's swords. I like how it's Usopp that saves him. It fits in with the whole different crewmates have different roles for a reason thing. But man, the absolute triumph with the announcement Rob Lucci has been spotted unconscious. And a round 3 knockout victory goes to Straw Hat Luffy. Now they just need to escape. Episode 310. I get it now. Pell, Pagaya, now Polly. This is the will of P that everyone keeps talking about. You can't kill characters with a P name. At least this time we get an actual explanation as to how they survived. I love it when Sanji runs off and does his own thing for a bit. It always yields A-class results. And I'm not gonna lie, I definitely shed some happy tears at the end of this episode. The way Usopp has been hearing her coming for a few episodes because he has the strongest connection with her. But all the Straw Hats still end up hearing her voice in the end. The way they all so happily jump into the sea because they know what's waiting for them. An absolutely incredible, beautiful moment all centered around the going merry. To think, if it weren't for that Sheep Butler 300 episodes ago, things would be going incredibly different right now. Episode 311. I know I said this last episode, but I love how Sanji's side quests come to fruition. Closing the gates of justice so the ships crash into each other. Just a purely brilliant move. I cannot believe that Nami navigating these whirlpools was actually foreshadowed in Long Ring Long Land. Eiichiro Oda, you've done it again. You know, I love it when Zoro and Sanji work together. This whole escape episode is filled with some great moments, but I think that the best is Spondum getting a well-deserved break after all of his hard work. And you know, if we go by the recruitment criteria I outlined, technically we've seen Kokoro's backstory too. But I do have one question. What sea train is this? The Puffing Tom already departed filled with fleeing Marines, and Rocket Man is in the crumbling remains of the Tower of Law. It's a fun moment, don't get me wrong, but like, how did it get here? Episode 312. This show really knows how to make a grown man cry. Between Iceberg fulfilling the Mary's last request, the crew searching for a mysterious figure that isn't there, and the Mary holding in just long enough to get them all to safety. Close to a year ago now, I predicted there wouldn't be any major character deaths until at least episode 250. I was a little off on that count, but I didn't expect it to be the Mary. This is such a beautiful funeral episode for the ship though, especially because the animation staff went the extra mile of redoing the animation
Island for some of her most important moments. It's all just such a beautiful, emotional moment, even if Apis is also included for some reason. And I love that the Mary speaks to them one final time, with Luffy apologizing for not treating her better. This is truly a beautiful way to cap off Enies Lobby and say goodbye to the Mary.
Let's all have a moment of silence for the animated boat that made me cry. I think Enies Lobby is quite possibly the best arc in the series so far. It reaches all the same heights as prior great arcs like Arlong Park and Alabasta, while delving into much more mature territory than even Sky Island Saga touched. The government has also never exactly been portrayed as the good guys, but typically their antagonistic depictions have been reserved for people just doing their jobs or individual corrupt actors. The shift to painting the whole government as a villainous entity that hides the truth of the world isn't out of nowhere. After all, they did put a bounty on an 8-year-old's head, but it does mark a shift in how the series handles these subjects. Instead of individual actors corrupting the system itself is now a corrupt mix of clashing ideals and differing ideas of what justice means. You have Aokiji's concept of slovenly justice, Lucci talks about dark justice, you have whatever the hell kind of justice it is when you blow up a ship of refugees. The stage has been set for a truly intriguing exploration of how the world government works, operates, and thinks that I hope the series delves into as we continue along this path. The elephant fruit, ox fruit model giraffe, and dog fruit model wolf are all going into B tier. Again, this is the case of the users making them worthwhile. On their own, each fruit is just a standard Zoan no matter how determined Kaku is to prove that the giraffe is cool. The bubble fruit is going into low A tier. The strong sapping bubbles and ability to immobilize enemies is cool, but even just a small splash of water voids your attacks. The berry fruit is going into B tier. It's like Buggy's fruit, but worse and round. The rust fruit is going into high A tier. Great offensive potential that can really mess up someone's day, but few extra defensive capabilities and limited non-combat application. Well, at least limited non-combat application that isn't incredibly rude. The wheel fruit is a special case because it was never shown in the anime despite its user appearing. It gets put into C tier because B tier is already too crowded and it's not very strong either way. Also, Netflix weirdly breaks up Enies Lobby into like 3 or 4 arcs, which accomplishes nothing but making navigating episodes on my desktop more frustrating. Speaking of Netflix, One Piece episode of Alabasta, the Pirates and the Princess of the Desert, also known as One Piece, the Desert Princess and the Pirates Adventures in Alabasta, is actually the earliest One Piece movie that you can watch in English dub format, as well as the earliest One Piece movie available on Netflix in the United States. This is beneficial to me because I'm a dumb American who can only speak Japanese at a very basic level. I know what a tanuki is and how to ask for directions to the train station, but not how to follow them. Episode of Alabasta also takes the distinction of being One Piece's first recap movie. Recap episodes up to that point had been fair game for the series, with several having aired as regular episodes during the Enies Lobby Arc, and 2 having aired as separate broadcasts from the actual show by the time the movie came out. But those all largely consisted of existing animation that hadn't been touched up beyond simply fitting the frame to HD standards. Episode of Alabasta, on the other hand, was completely reanimated, and also had several deviances from the arc as it was released in the anime and manga to fit the whole thing into a 90-minute runtime. As the first attempt at retelling an older arc, Episode of Alabasta also had a very difficult task on its hands. What needs to be changed? What needs to stay the same? How has the style shifted in the almost 5 years since Alabasta was first animated? But most importantly, will looking back at One Piece's past help shape the future of the series? In my other One Piece movie segments, I've given recaps before moving on to the analysis portions of the video, but that's primarily been due to the lack of ease of access that every prior movie has had. If you want to watch One Piece the movie or Chopper's Kingdom on the Island of Strange Animals, you have to go to less than legitimate sites or pay exorbitant fees to not only get a copy of the film, but also a region-compatible DVD or Blu-ray player. With Episode of Alabasta, that just isn't the case. Also, it's literally just the Alabasta arc. If you're watching this and you haven't seen up to that point in the series, just go watch it or read it and then come back. That said, there is still one addition I want to talk about before sticking my thumb in the pie. One Piece Episode of Alabasta Prologue. The Episode of Alabasta Prologue was added onto the movie much later, being produced for the TV broadcast of Episode of Alabasta in 2011. For reference, Episode of Alabasta came out in 2007. It's 15 minutes long and never released in America, and in fact, I don't even think fan subtitles exist for it. To find it, I had a deep dive into the website that Happiness Forgot, Reddit. Also, in all technicality, I should be talking about this video during the Marineford Saga, but it makes more sense to talk about it paired with the actual movie. Just like the actual movie, Episode of Alabasta Prologue is a condensed retelling of an older arc, in this case, Whiskey Peak. To keep the flow of the arc in line with the movie, there are a few notable differences. To start, Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine aren't aboard the Going Merry on the approach to Cactus Island. Instead, they're waiting on the shore with the rest of Baroque Works as the Straw Hats make landfall. Mr. Nine also plays an even more minimal role than he did in the actual arc, only appearing for crowd shots and a very brief spot of action. The majority of the special is focused on Zoro tearing through Whiskey Peak citizens, which they they speed through the opening to get to quicker, and the freshly revealed Princess Vivi being chased by Mr. Five and Miss Valentine's Day, who arrived much sooner than they do in the actual series. Otherwise, barring a few more small changes to the flow of action, this is pretty much just Whiskey Peak. And it's not like even essential viewing for the actual episode of Alabasta movie, seeing as, again, this was animated as a companion to the movie multiple years later, and is a retelling of an even older arc. In spite of its inessential nature, the prologue has the same foundational basis as the movie, embracing old material to make up for newer projects performing poorly. Your first instinct when you hear that is probably going to be something like, the anime and manga weren't doing poorly in either 2007 or 2011. In fact, those were some of the most peak moments of the series. And yeah, you'd be right, Gaia preemptively made up to make a point, but outside of the main series, One Piece was floundering. One Piece movies started being released in the year 2000, with One Piece the movie. Then in 2001, the second movie came out, and then the third in 2002, and that consistently continued every year right up until 2007, and even a couple years past it. But you know what wasn't consistent in that 8-year time span? How well those movies were doing. Every successive release, starting with Dead End Adventure, the first One Piece movie to be released with independent box office data, grossed less and less than the last. It got to the point where the movie preceding episode of Alabasta grossed less than half of what Dead End Adventure did, and I can only imagine that projections were looking similar for any original movie that Toei might be able to cook up. Hence, episode of Alabasta. If selling something new isn't working, why not sell something old and beloved repackaged with fancy new animation and a fresh coat of paint? And then after that doesn't do well, add a little more on top for the TV broadcast. This time it'll work. So yeah, needless to say, episode of Alabasta did not do well at the box office. Getting close to, but ultimately falling short of even Karakuri Castle's $7.2 million gross. The reason why is really simple too. It just wasn't accessible to new audiences. There's a reason that you start at chapter 1 when you open a book and not chapter 12, or in this case there's a reason they went back and tacked Whiskey Peak to the start of the movie. What makes the Alabasta arc work is that we're seeing the culmination of plot threads that were seeded from the moment that the Straw Hats entered the Grand Line and met Miss Wednesday inside of the giant whale Laboon. We're given dozens of episodes to grow attached to Vivi as the Straw Hats bond with her. We're shown how caring she is when she's willing to push the crew to find a doctor for Nami at the risk of not getting to Alabasta in time. The foes that pursue her are entangled with the Straw Hats on Little Garden, and Karu is also there. Vivi is the emotional core of the arc. If you don't let the audience get to know her, the story won't be nearly as effective. And despite the alterations made in episode of Alabasta, ranging from removing major elements like Ace's existence in the presence of the Marines, to swapping minor elements like having Crocodile dehydrate Luffy's leg rather than his arm, that Vivi-centric emotional core stays fully intact. Because without it, you wouldn't have Alabasta anymore. Just a bunch of weirdos beating each other up in the desert. Thus, the problem appears. Centering the story around Vivi won't be a hit for anyone that hasn't already seen Alabasta, alienating newcomers to the series and placing the success of the franchise on people who've been dedicated fans for years. My name isn't John Toei, so I can never be certain the exact philosophy behind choosing Alabasta of all arcs to adapt, but I have to assume that they were banking on that core audience to come out for the movie under the assumption that the major deviations from canon in the previous movies are what drove that portion of the audience away. Inadvertently, they may have proven the opposite, that One Piece's core audience were the only ones that would show up for these movies, whether they catered to existing fans or not, especially given the aforementioned box office similarities between Karakuri Castle and episode of Alabasta, the former being widely accessible to casual audiences at the cost of quality and focus, and the latter being so narrowly focused on the existing audience that it leaves new members behind on the wayside. And I'm sure neither audience group was pleased by the staggering amount and choices of what was cut. I mentioned before that Ace and the Marines were completely cut from the film. Ace being cut doesn't really impact much, especially since a majority of his time spent in Alabasta was anime-only material of him wandering through the desert, and really just set up a plot thread that wouldn't get picked up for years. Similarly, a lot of smaller moments kind of get folded into one another. All the dance powder info dumping happens shortly after meeting Bon Clay for the first time, the Supersonic Duck Squad is almost completely absent in favor of the Perverted Crab, Toto just hands Luffy the Yuba water instead of him working for it, but on the other hand, the Marines had a major presence in the arc. Not only was it the first return of Smoker after Logtown, but it also saw him and the Straw Hats briefly and reluctantly working together when Crocodile reveals himself at rain dinners. With no Marines, that means no rain dinners, which is good because it saves time and is largely in service of the series-wide plot that the movie doesn't need to worry about. But cutting rain dinners means we also cut seeing the Baroque Works officer agents meet with Crocodile for the first time, and if that's being cut for time, we may as well also cut Spider's Cafe. Cutting the Marine presence ultimately means that the first time we see the Baroque Works officers is in a random patch of desert where none of their personalities are put on display, effectively making all of them, except for Bon Clay, interchangeable, bland lumps of evil. To top it all off, Toei didn't cut the massive ship that fell down on the port town, because that's the inciting incident for the rebel attack. But since the supporting villains have been trimmed down role-wise, we kind of just cut to an unexplained burning massive city, and the child that once served an important symbolic role is now just a visual shorthand for Baroque Works' cruelty. This also becomes a bit of an issue during the fight scenes. Every fight but Luffy vs. Crocodile is incredibly incredibly rushed, which isn't helped by the villains being really flat. On top of that, the cuts for time are largely character building moments for the Straw Hats. If there's no 5-ton hammer scene, this shit ain't Alabasta. While Sanji, Chopper, and Usopp aren't supremely negatively effective, Nami vs. Miss Doublefinger is one of her most important action moments, and it gets entirely sidelined. The fight is supposed to introduce the Climax, her go-to weapon for the rest of the series, and is her first big solo win against a strong opponent. What do we get instead? Her lack of familiarity with Climax is barely acknowledged, she has the shortest fight of all the Straw Hats, and whatever growth she would have displayed during her fight happened before the movie even started. Zoro barely fares any better, with his whole thing about learning to cut steel being entirely omitted. That was one of my favorite parts of the whole saga, demonstrating his ability to cut nothing by slashing at the leaves, standing in the one clear spot of the falling rubble, the wise advice of his sensei guiding him, all gone because we need to wrap these fights up before the halfway mark to squeeze everything else in. For the isolated world of this movie, these character moments were largely unnecessary. After all, this is Vivi's emotional journey and Luffy's physical triumph, but in the larger world of One Piece media, it forms a depressing warning about the trajectory of supplementary content. Episode of Alabasta dictates its cuts under the assumption that you are familiar with the Alabasta arc, creating an insular environment where incoming and unfamiliar fans are shut out or left confused or dissatisfied. Instead of rewarding longtime fans with fancy visuals and a retelling of a beloved chunk of the story, all that's accomplished is putting a shiny veneer on a country club sign that says members only. I want to preface that what I'm going to say next does not reflect on fans of One Piece. In my experience since starting the show and making my videos, the One Piece fandom is largely accepting and welcoming of newcomers and eager to share their interest with new fans. There may be some negative swaths of fandom out there, and maybe I've just been lucky to not run into them, but I wholeheartedly think that the One Piece fandom in general treats casual fans and new fans very well compared to other fan groups I've been a part of. Toei Animation, on the other hand, would murder any individual fan if they could make 10 yen doing it, and would do it with a smile on their faces if that fan had only seen 10 episodes. Individual artists and employees at Toei probably think differently, but to the company as a whole, the only way to be a fan of One Piece, or any of their shows really, is to hand over lots and lots of money for merchandise and movie tickets and all that jazz. In making Episode of Alabasta as the 8th movie, Toei is setting up a future of One Piece media that rewards only the fans that they consider worth it, those who have paid in the most and viewed the most while casting aside the rest. And it's easy to understand why they went this route. Let's look back at all of the movies released during the Water 7 Saga's anime run. We have 3 of them, movies 6, 7, and 8. Each was a path that One Piece could have gone down. Movie 6 was bold, experimental, pushed the series in new directions, and earned 3 million less than the previous movie, so the new territory path was abandoned. Movie 7 followed the same formula and tropes as the previous, largely successful One Piece movies, to the point that some people consider it to be parodying those movies, and grossed an additional 3 million less at the box office. Say goodbye to the tried and true path, and that leaves movie 8, a retelling of the climactic arc, as faithful as it can be while staying within the restrictions that a 90-minute runtime imposes. And sure, this one didn't gain any box office traction, but it also didn't lose as much as the previous drops. I probably came off as a grumbling curmudgeon a bit so far in this video, so I want to elaborate that I think it is a completely fair and rewarding strategy to make movies with a focus on longtime fans. Just that I think the way Episode of Alabasta went about doing so was the wrong fashion. No other One Piece movie relied on knowing the series to the same extent while still managing to deliver fan-servicey moments. Chopper's Kingdom on the Island of Strange Animals, for instance, has a moment where Chopper reminisces on his time with Hero Look. It's kept brief and imparts Chopper's emotional connection to his flag to anyone who hasn't seen Drum Island, while anyone who has can point and shout at the screen because they understood that reference. Baron Omatsuri's big twist is hinted at by one of the bad guys talking about his crew recently meeting Gold Roger. The impossibility of that statement is pointed out in the movie, but it's still a moment that fans can use to connect the story to the wider world of One Piece. In Dead End Adventure, when Luffy fights Gaspard, he straight up uses a couple of the moves that he used against Crocodile, a callback that doubles as a silly moment of action. Episode of Alabasta, on the other hand, relies on emotional connections rather than pattern recognition. Take for instance the scene where Luffy punches Vivi. It's supposed to be a moment where Luffy displays that they're all in this together and that Vivi isn't the only one risking her own life. She has to be prepared for pain and the possibility of someone dying. In the anime and manga, it comes not after just the preceding arcs of the saga, but also after we've spent a decent chunk of time in Alabasta and ventured all the way to Yuba, which is to say, even if you skip straight to the start of the Alabasta arc, you would still have the time to connect with Vivi and the Straw Hats. Episode of Alabasta skips over everything between Bon Clay leaving the Mary and Yuba, meaning that we spend roughly 5 minutes and 55 seconds of the 15 minutes and 8 seconds that it takes to get to this part of the film focused on the Straw Hats, and Bon Clay ends up with more screen time than any individual character, including Vivi. To be fair, that 5:55 isn't precise, and the Straw Hats do also spend a decent amount of time on screen with Bon Clay. I'm just considering it separate since the focus of the scene is on the Mary's special guest rather than its permanent residence. But it still doesn't bode well, and the rest of the time spent with the Straw Hats is broken up into chunks that last less than 2.5 minutes at at their longest, and a decent amount of that time is spent in Yuba talking about the rebel army. That's all to say, the biggest problem with Episode of Alabasta, and its relative lack of failure compared to the preceding One Piece movies, is that it makes the series required viewing for the emotional beats to hit, a problem entirely caused by trying to fit such a large arc into just an hour and a half. To quote a contemporary review of the first English release, "Squeezing an enormous plot into a teeny little film like a man in a midlife crisis trying to squeeze into high school jeans, One Piece trims itself so that the flabby love handles don't show in its new feature-length duds. The result is more a reminder of times past than a work of art, but given the length of time we may have to wait before an unbutchered version of those times is available, it's better than nothing." And if you think I've gotten up in arms all for nothing throughout this whole video, then let me just point out that we don't live in 2007, and we can see the direct ramifications of Episode of Alabasta in the 9th One Piece movie. Heck, they're literally remastering Fishman Island as we speak. Maybe all that material is better than Episode of Alabasta. I'm still working my way through the show one episode at a time, so I can't comment on their quality quite yet. But what I can tell you is that by cutting so much growth and connection for so many characters, by sidelining the villains, and by simply putting too much on its plate, Episode of Alabasta sets the example on exactly how not to remake an old arc. I think it's about time that we return to the shorts feed. We've got just a little more to get through before we're done. I hope you're a fan of light filler mixed with canon material, because we're ending off with Post-Enies Lobby.
I'm watching all of One Piece for the first time and reviewing every episode.
Episode 313.
Fun fact, Water 7 sinking is probably inspired by its real-world inspiration Venice also slowly sinking, albeit not as dramatic of a rate. Second fun fact, unlike Water 7, the Italian government has never considered turning Venice into a boat. I do like that it's Tom that inspires Iceberg and Frankie to build their shipwright masterpieces. Plus, a boat made of super strong wood is probably something the Straw Hats need. And thanks to these random dudes, the only one who lost any significantly valuable personal items was Usopp. Chopper not letting Robin out of his sight while they were out is adorable, especially Robin's at ease soldier. So this is Kobe and Helmeppo, right? Because Garp personally trained them and I recognize Helmeppo's voice. Also, Garp being Luffy's grandfather, didn't see that coming. I think it's a cool twist that his grandfather is a vice admiral despite him and his brother both being pirates. I guess sometimes the apple does fall pretty far away from the marine battleship.
Episode 314.
You know, sometimes you just want to make a joke that Alvida is Luffy's mom, and then you're like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if I built out like a fake family tree for Luffy with all the people that are looking for him or helping him with the mysterious reasons? Oh, what if this guy's his father? What if this guy's his brother? And it turns out that guy is his brother, and then 200 episodes later, it turns out this guy really is his father. So now I just have to sit in fear that Alvida is Luffy's mom, and I'm never gonna make a joke again. But, it's kind of funny how Garp and Luffy both fell asleep. I recognize Shanks and Whitebeard, but who the heck are these two? They look like they'd sell your soul for $5. And what kind of food are they serving at Marine HQ? Human growth hormone? What happened to Kobe? And look how fast Helmeppo's hair grew. At least it's not that ugly bowl cut anymore. I do also like Garp helping fix the wall since he's the one that broke it.
Episode 315.
So Vegapunk is the name of the guy that keeps putting devil fruits in weapons. I've got a couple words I'd like to give that guy. Also, I like that Nami just has a wiretap and is listening into marine secrets. I also like that Kobe still has dreams of becoming a great marine, even though the marines are being revealed to be more and more corrupt by the moment. Maybe he can change something on the inside. But no arc is complete without an end of arc party. You just know that Sanji owns an apron that says kiss the cook that he had to take off after Kokoro did it 3 times. And this exchange between Aokiji and Robin is really good. The way that Aokiji talks about his doubts about whether or not he's done the right thing and then tells Robin to live her life is just so good. It is a great character moment. After the great lengths they went to save her, it's nice to see Robin finally be allowed some peace and a moment of quiet with her new family.
Episode 316.
You just know that Shanks is one of the realest dudes in the room when his sheer presence is enough to make Whitebeard pirates flop over. That just makes it all the more intimidating when Shanks says you need to be careful about this Blackbeard guy. I also really enjoy how Whitebeard's like, my whole crew are my sons, and I'm gonna fuck up the guy that killed one of them. Also, Shanks and Buggy both being on Gold Roger's crew is pretty cool, especially because Shanks went on to be great and Buggy went on to be Buggy. Look, Buggy's a fun antagonist, but he's just not cool enough to sacrifice his arm to teach a lesson to the next generation like Shanks is. And the sky splitting in two when Shanks and Whitebeard start arguing is such a cool visual. As for Straw Hats and Coat this episode, I like the idea that Aokiji pulled some strings to get the Frankie family off scot-free. I also really like Galley Law coming to help Frankie build the Straw Hats' new ship. And Luffy spending 100 million berries to throw the world's greatest party is completely in character. And Nami is 100% right to be upset with him.
Episode 317.
Among the things I never expected One Piece filler to touch on, it is the death of a beloved elderly pet. I do have to say though, it is done pretty tastefully, with less of a focus on comedy and more of a focus on this girl and her connection to her beloved pet. That said, there are plenty of funny moments in this episode. Like Robin unintentionally creating the world's scariest urban legend, and Usopp practicing how to ask to be let back onto the crew. The ending is also super sweet, and I really like it.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a beloved elderly pet to snuggle.
Episode 318.
The premise of Zoro gets conscripted into a found family is perfect for one of these slice-of-life filler episodes. Plus, Zoro is a natural-born parent, apparently. Here we see the wild mother Zoro carrying its young by the scruff of its neck. Not to mention, he absolutely rocks that crop top. The humorous slice-of-life elements are what make this episode enjoyable. What little action there is kind of lackluster. I don't really think anyone was yearning to see the guy that Galley Law beat up to show how strong they are. But the action also isn't the point of these episodes. In general, these post-arc slice-of-life episodes give a much-needed breather following all the heavy drama and action, so I thoroughly enjoyed it. My only complaint is that Zoro doesn't get to wear the crop top for longer.
Episode 319.
This episode is all about Sanji and Chimney's day out shopping. There's some strong character work here. I especially like the way that Nami and Robin trick Sanji into doing what Chimney wants. But then as soon as they leave, he's all for it, so he doesn't upset a lady. This drunk old man is a pretty fun one-episode character. I especially like how he has a photo of him and Zeph up on his wall. And this visual is perfect for detailing not only the origin of the flavor, but also Sanji's response to being outcooked. I also like how Sanji goes on a short quest for the knowledge of how to make better food, rather than just immediately trying to prove that he's the better cook. And the secret being dried up salt from Aqua Laguna is a pretty fun reveal. But Sanji, please wash that salt first. Birds shit on those roofs. Overall, just another very enjoyable slice of life downtime episode. I also like how these last 3 filler episodes have all been taking place at the same time. Sanji was seen pushing his cart in the Zoro episode, Zoro was seen with Michael and Hoikel in the Luffy episode, and Robin and Nami have been shopping throughout all 3.
Episode 320.
If the Straw Hat's next island that the log pose is pointing at is Fishman Island, that means they're almost halfway across the Grand Line. Brand new ship, brand new crewmate, brand new half of the world to explore. A few episodes ago, Kobe called the second half of the Grand Line the New World, which to me evokes imagery of unexplored, uncharted, and potentially dangerous scenarios. Sounds to me like the Straw Hats still have a couple more obstacles before they get there, but given the mature tonal shift of this saga and specifically Enies Lobby, I have faith that it'll be handled well. As for the new wanted posters, all the bounty increases make sense. And I like Nami's cat burglar title, and poor cotton candy loving Chopper's 50 berry bounty. But even with the cotton candy, Sanji got it worst. This is the funniest possible outcome. I also like how Zanbai begs Luffy to take Frankie out to sea with him. It really shows how much care and respect the Frankie family have for Frankie. They want him to stay safe even if it means they may never see him again. They ain't just the Frankie friends. They're the Frankie family.
Episode 321.
For starters, the new ship looks not necessarily bad, just different. The figurehead for sure isn't my favorite, but everything else about it looks really nice. Plus, it's so much bigger than the Mary was. Hey look, it's attached to Photo Guy from the SBS. And he's getting reprimanded for subpar work. Oh, I like that Frankie wants to go with the Straw Hats so badly that he's purposely avoiding them to stay in Water 7. Stealing his underwear to convince him is also one hell of a plan. There are children present. Frankie's for sure ending up on some kind of a list. There's just so many shots of Frankie's bare ass this episode, and he's definitely hanging dong if he still has one. The actual chase sequence of Frankie slowly whittling down the Frankie family is also pretty fun. I also really enjoyed Frankie and Luffy's casual banter about the ship. Oh god, Chopper, not with your mouth, you know exactly where that's been. Also, this shot with the baseball reminds me of that scene from the Simpsons movie with Bart, which is funny because this episode aired like a month after the Simpsons movie came out. Episode 322. She got him right in the little Frankies. His tangerines, his grapes, his apples, his dos huevos, his family jewels, his barrel of monkeys. That's just cruel. I like that Frankie's dream isn't just to build a ship, but to build a ship and sail it across the entire Grand Line. And the way that he formed the Frankie family by just finding a bunch of social outcasts and adopting them. I think something important for the Straw Hats that the Frankie family has in common is that they all know that the bonds of family aren't just forged by blood. All of them were at some point outcasts who were taken in and cared for by strangers. So seeing this origin of the Frankie family where Frankie does the exact same thing, it really cements the idea that he was meant to be on this crew, even if it means a tearful goodbye with the Frankie family. He's gonna fit in great with the Straw Hats, even if he does spend his entire walk up to the ship buck naked. Plus the Straw Hats really need a shipwright, and he is one.
Episode 323.
I love how much you can tell that no one wants to leave Usopp behind. The way they stall for as long as possible against a man whose arms are equivalent to cannons. Seriously, Garp is insane. And the way that everyone pretends to not hear Usopp when Chopper points out his yells. When we were shown glimpses of Usopp practicing how to ask to rejoin the crew, he was only ever practicing scenarios where they would ask him to rejoin the crew. And this episode continues with that. It fits with his whole refusal to accept that the Mary was beyond repair, except this time he has the opportunity to get back what he lost. And Zoro has a really good point in that Usopp should apologize. He may have been going through a period of high emotion, but if Usopp wants back on the crew, he's the one that has to mend the burned bridges. Even if everyone, including Zoro, wants him back. And that's what makes this moment where Usopp really does apologize so good. This whole saga has been filled with some incredible moments, so having this moment to help cap it off is just perfect. Top 10 Usopp face. But I'm left with one more pressing question. Why is the steering wheel at the front of the ship? Episode 324. I like the name The Thousand Sunny, but the way that Iceberg tells Frankie the name idea has a real Fant 4-stick vibe to it. A ship that can sail 1,000 seas with a sunny smile on its face.
Say that again?
Where the hell was Garp keeping that cannonball? It's bigger than his ship! Oh hey, Smoker and Tashiki! Haven't seen them in like 200 episodes, I wonder what they've been up to. I love the Baratier chef's reaction to Sanji's wanted poster. All of these reactions to the new bounties are great, like Bar Girl assuming that Chopper is Luffy's pet, but I think my favorite is Genzo lodging a complaint about the photo they use only to have a blown up version on the wall. Seeing all these characters and their reactions to their loved ones following their dreams really is heartwarming. And I love seeing Vivi and Karu again. I think my least favorite though is Dragon's reaction to the wanted posters. He's all like, yeah, go change the world, son, you're gonna show him how it's done. Meanwhile, Luffy's just having a drink. You can tell he's a pirate because he's underage drinking, which is illegal. Episode 325. This is the official final episode of the Water 7 saga. And what better way to spend it than with my boy Ace getting his ass kicked by Blackbeard. This fight is super fun with all the creative uses of Logia powers, but oh my gosh, the dark fruit's just on a whole nother level. Even if it doesn't come with the Logia ability to not get hit, the sheer destructive power it displays is incredible. And the ability to nullify Devil Fruit powers is a game changer. Basing the abilities around a black hole is a really nice touch. And if something slightly less straightforward like Darkness can get its own Logia fruit, I look forward to seeing what else can. But the ending of this episode is killer. What do you mean this kicked off a series of events that would change the world?
While editing the short for episode 313, I was struck with the realization that this saga introduced a guy named Tom and a guy named Jerry. Do with that information what you will. Dark Fruit goes in S tier, and I don't think I need to explain why. It's the end of the saga again, so you know what that means. Let's start the SBS. Oda's Q&A segments are infamous for providing extra canon information, covering up mistakes, and having terrible jokes. But I think that some of my favorites are the ones that come with sketches attached to them. Like this sketch from volume 33, where Oda was asked what it would look like if all the Straw Hats were combined in Wapple's stomach. A true vision of beauty. A few questions later in that same volume, Oda also confirmed that the old man from Long Green Longland would soil his pants when he needed to use the restroom. In Volume 35's SBS, Oda confirms that Nola the Snake is named after Noland the Not Quite a Liar, something that I didn't realize needed confirming. He also says that the older lady Sanji was dancing with at the end of Skypiea was once the most beautiful woman on the island 40 years ago. In Volume 36, we get another sketch, this time of the Baroque Works Mr. 7 that tried recruiting Zoro prior to the series' start. Peak character design right here. A few questions later, he also answers a question about Nami's boob size, stating that, the size increase is intentional, and that he will continue to make them bigger. Here's a drawing of how Chopper holds things from Volume 37, and another one comparing Usopp and Kaku's nose sizes. Usopp wins by a hair. Volume 37 also brings us Nami and Robin's measurements, delivered in character by Sanji. In Volume 38, Oda gives us an interesting tidbit about the Frankie family. They're all failures. Well, specifically Mozu, Kiwi, and Zambai failed the Galley Law entry tests to become shipwrights and turned to a life of not technically crime after Frankie united all the scoundrels and criminals of Water 7 under his care. In Volume 39, Oda received a question asking if the Puffing Tom and Rocket Man were named after two real-life trains, the Puffing Billy and the Rocket. Oda not only says they were, but also gives the reasons why. The Puffing Billy is the world's oldest locomotive, and the Rocket was really fast. I think this is actually a great example of how Oda puts in an amazing depth of research for even these small details. And in the same volume, we also get another sketch, this time of the infamous Michael and Hoikel. This was drawn before Enies Lobby was finished, so that's actually the first time we saw the infamous criminals that the Galley Law boys thought could have shot Iceberg. Volume 40 had a couple good questions sent in, such as one accusing Oda of liking big boobs, which he could not deny. Also one asking why Frankie is fueled by cola, because it tastes good, and one asking how Chopper plays rock, paper, scissors. In Volume 41, we get a glimpse of what the dogs on Enies Lobby gossip about. Also a sketch of a wild transponder snail. And when asked about how Crocodile bathes, Oda mentions that for the purpose of Devil Fruit weaknesses, the sea is any standing body of water no matter the size, and that he personally bathes twice a year. In Volume 42, a reader asks which is faster, Captain Kuro's or CP9's speed techniques. The answer is that they're equally as fast, but Kuro doesn't have any fine control over his, and has to attack blindly while CP9 can still see. In that same volume, Oda says that Jabber's crush turned him down because she has a crush on Lucci.
Good luck on that one, Catherine. This is also the SBS where Oda says that he's had the ending of One Piece planned from the start, and that his estimate of 5 years was just a tad bit short. In Volume 42, Sodom and Gomorrah are confirmed to be named after the cities from the Bible, but not for any deeper meaning, just because they sound cool.
Blows shouldn't hurt Luffy, so why does he get bruises and swelling when Nami and the others beat the crap out of him? Tell me!
When the crew beats up on each other, it's always an admonishment with a strong sense of purpose, which is why it works so well. It works on his spirit. I bet Nami is thinking, it's his spirit that hurts deep down, right? I guess not.
A questioner also asks what Enel's bounty would have been if he were active on the Blue Sea, and while no hard numbers are given, Oda says that he would have easily had a bounty of 500 million berries. That's more than just about 99% of anyone on the first half of the Grand Line. In Volume 44, Oda is forced to state that he is not, in fact, an Okama. He also states that the hair guy's mom is actually still alive. Anyways, here's the members of CP9 as children. In the same volume, Oda reassures a reader that Santa exists, and also that Khalifa hid her key in there. Throughout the entire Saga's SBS, there's actually a recurring gag of this triangle-headed guy asking to be let into the 7 warlords, only for Oda to refuse every time, culminating in Volume 45, where Oda refuses definitively once and for all, and then uses the next question to confirm that Robin could create extra boobs with her devil fruit. Volume 46 is actually a special SBS about the inner parts of the Thousand Sunny. A similar SBS was done for the Mary a whole bunch of chapters ago, so it's fun to see a new one done for this ship too. And that's all the SBS for this saga. Technically speaking, the Volume 46 SBS could also count as the first SBS for the next saga, but I'm keeping it here for arbitrary reasons. That also means that we can move on to the actual story content for this video segment, the cover stories. Stories that exist exclusively on One Piece's chapter covers. This saga has 2 full cover stories and the start of a 3rd one, so I'll only be covering Gadatsu's accidental Blue Sea life and Miss Golden Week's Operation Meet Baroque works, while leaving the 3rd one for another time. Let's start with Gadatsu. For context, this story follows the end of his fight against Chopper in Skypiea, where he accidentally shot himself straight into the cloud bed.
And straight out the other side. Gadatsu lands on an island covered in holes, where he meets a miner that wants to turn the area into a hot springs resort. Gadatsu decides he wants to be the boss of the Blue Sea and joins the old man in digging. The two go about their chores with Gadatsu doing his forget basic bodily functions gimmick until they strike something huge, a giant mole. Gadatsu KOs the mole and takes him as a henchman, which allows the whole digging to go remarkably fast. The boss of the forest gets interested and Gadatsu repeats the process of making new friends. Leaving the forest boss to work, Gadatsu and the mole go on a long tunnel excursion, surfacing many miles away in Yuba. Coincidentally, the guy Gadatsu has been working with is Koza's uncle. Gadatsu takes the Yuba boys and Karu back with him to check out the hot springs, only to find that the forest boss built a whole resort. An official undersea tunnel is built between Yuba and the Ukuri hot spring island, operated by the Alabasta pervert crab, and it becomes quite the popular destination, even getting a visit from royalty. Pell, Chaka, Igorom's wife Vivi, and a bunch of kung fu dugongs all relax at the spa as Gadatsu mans the front desk, only to be met with sudden horror as he realizes he isn't the boss of the Blue Sea, just a bathing resort. If you go back to my Sky Island shorts, then you'll see it's no secret that I'm not the biggest fan of Gadatsu and his overly forgetful gimmick, but the way this cover story uses it by saving the hard punchline for the very last 2 panels is incredibly funny. I'm also a big fan of incorporating Alabasta into the story, but it makes me question where the Straw Hats in Skypiea were actually floating the whole time they were up there. Presumably the island Gadatsu landed on is close to Jaya, but it also can't be that far from Alabasta, so I'm gonna tentatively put it halfway between the two and call it good enough. A couple of things from this cover story were actually also used for anime original material, and by a couple things, I mean they straight up yoinked that mole and stuck it right at the end of Long Ring Long Land. They had to shove some more filler in there before getting to Aokiji, and what do you know, they got a mole design right there. Whether or not Gadatsu himself will reappear in the actual story is also a toss-up. A decent amount of these cover stories do have ramifications on the actual plot, so if he ever does, I don't want any of you to be shocked. Speaking of ramifications, this next cover story will eventually impact the series, but for now, we'll evaluate it on its own merit. Miss Golden Week's Operation Meet Baroque Works starts on Little Garden, with the 3 Baroque Works agents who were left behind reading about all the others getting caught. Miss Golden Week wants to do a breakout and hitches a ride using her paint, saying goodbye to Dory on the way out. Him and Brokey have still been engaged in their combat ritual this whole time, by the way. Some rain washes away Miss Golden Week's paint, stranding the Baroque Works agents on a fairly nice island. A fairly nice island filled with Marines. And not just any Marines. Django and Full Body. Oh, and Hina. The former Baroque Works agents are all wanted, so our protagonists don disguises and then immediately get caught because the unluckies snitched. The resulting scuffle ends with Mr. 5 and Miss Golden Week escaping, but Miss Valentine's Day is captured. Those two and Mr. 3 end up as the most wanted people on the island. Speaking of Mr. 3, he managed to escape marine capture in Alabasta and made it back to his boat only to be confronted by a mysterious figure. It's Mr. 2, baby! He managed to escape Hina and ties up Mr. 3 as bait. Psych! It's Bon Clay again! He ends up getting captured, but his distraction gives the others time to rescue Miss Valentine's Day and steal Hina's ship. The gang sails the ship to the pre-sentencing jail the rest of the agents are being held in. They pretend to get caught and are brought into the same cells as the others. They gather everyone in one place and make their great escape, but Crocodile and Mr. 1 choose to stay behind. Miss Golden Week unleashes one last powerful rainbow that transforms everyone into the outfit of their dreams. Miss Golden Week is an artist, Miss Merry Christmas is a princess, Miss Doublefinger is her disguise from the cafe, Miss Valentine's Day is a chocolatier, Mr. 5 is a firefighter, Mr. 4 is a pizza delivery man, and the gun dog is a tank. But this also affects the two who stayed behind, revealing that Mr. 1 wants to be a superhero and Crocodile wants to be king of the pirates. Shocker. The escapees all go to live out their dreams in a new Spider's Cafe, while those left behind are sentenced to live out the rest of their days in the underwater prison Impel Down. As of the end of the Water 7 saga, Operation Meet Baroque Works is the longest cover story in the series, spanning a whopping 43 chapters. That beats the previous record holder, Hachan Seafloor Stroll, by a whole 3 chapters. In its length, we managed to touch on and learn the fates of all the officer agents of Baroque Works, which I enjoy from the perspective of a lorehound who wants to know everything. Unfortunately, that nature also diminishes my enjoyment a little bit because I can't help but wonder how Bon Clay escaped from Hina the first time when he helped the Straw Hats escape. There was also a whole saga between the end of Alabasta and the start of this cover story, so part of me is curious why Oda decided to come back to it at this point. The cover stories I've covered so far have been all over the place in terms of chronology, some having to have happened far before the actual chapters they debuted on, and some being ambiguously placed. So it's always interesting to me to try to piece together the why now aspect of it. For instance, Django's Dance Carnival can easily be explained by Oda likes Django, but then you have cover stories like Buggy's Crew Adventure Chronicles which lead directly to him showing up at Logtown, so it isn't always easy to pick out the why here, why now. But I think that's all I want to talk about for this saga's SBS and cover stories, so all that leaves is the end.
Outro. The Water 7 saga is home to some of the highest highs and lowest lows of One Piece's early days. It's weird that over 300 episodes in is still considered in the early days, but it's not even halfway when you count sheer numbers. I've covered just about every single available bit of One Piece that I could possibly watch that's part of this saga, so let's finish off how I always like to, with a list of my favorites. Favorite new character? Frankie! As a red-blooded American, I've gotta pick the cyborg with a blue pompadour and a sensitive side. Favorite arc? The Sea Train. This is the arc that introduced us to the elusive Sniper King, on top of being well structured with a good amount of intrigue and build-up. Favorite scene? To the sea! It beats out the Mary's funeral because it's a final brief moment of happiness that they get with the ship, and sometimes I just want to be happy. Favorite new ability? Zoro's 9-sword style. Dude has never seen a devil fruit in real life, and somehow managed to whip out his own magic power. Favorite weird concept that just kind of works? The Klabautermann. It's based on a real sailor's myth and just works perfectly in the narrative and theme of the arc. I'd also like to take a moment to correct something I said in a short. I misread the Wikipedia page on the Klabautermann, and it's not that anyone who sees it is fated to die, it's that anyone who sees it is on a ship fated to die. As in, the Mary's fate was sealed the moment Usopp laid eyes on her spirit back on Skypiea. Thanks for watching. You can check out the rest of my full saga compilations right here, or all my shorts right here. I procrastinated a little bit, so these shorts are a few sagas ahead.